Welcome to Mr. Nightbleed. Tonight, in 7 creepiest graves ever discovered across the U.S., we descend into the places most people never see. The soil beneath forgotten cemeteries, the crypts sealed long before our time, and the graves that were never meant to be opened. From headstones that shift on their own, to coffins unearthed with strange carvings and impossible remains. These are the discoveries that left even seasoned investigators cold. Every story you're about to hear was uncovered by those who didn't go looking for horror, but found it anyway. Construction workers, caretakers, historians, each one faced something they could never explain and never unsee. My goal this month is to reach 3,000 subscribers. Almost 90% of viewers listen and vanish without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Join the darkness. Subscribe now. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and what hour of the night it is for you. And if there's a cemetery or burial ground near you that truly unsettles you, type its name below, because not everything buried stays silent, and not every grave rests easy. Kill the lights. Silence the world. Take a slow breath, and let us begin. I moved to New Orleans in late summer 2 years ago, right when the heat sits heavy on the city and the thunderstorms feel like someone turning a faucet on and off above your head. I'm not from there. I'm from a place where cemeteries are clean rows of granite with clipped grass and aluminum vases, and the dead stay where you put them. I took a sublet in St. Roch, a shotgun house with slanted floors and a back porch that sagged like a tired grin, because my friend Lena had a job for me. She runs a small crew that cleans storm damage from old buildings and historic sites. Mostly it's mold and swollen wood and broken glass, but sometimes it's stranger things. Things the insurance company doesn't like to hear about and the priest shrugs at with a cigarette between his fingers. Lena grew up there. Her cousin Andre worked with us from time to time, and he knew everybody from the 9th Ward to Gentilly by their nicknames. On my first free afternoon, he walked me down to the St. Roch Cemetery and Chapel, all above-ground tombs in tidy rows, whitewashed and flaking, names faded to whispers. He pointed out the chapel with its walls hung with crutches and braces and little cast-iron hearts, the ex-votos people left when they felt they'd been saved. "See?" he said, tapping a dented crutch with a finger. "People get better, they say thank you. People get worse, they light a candle anyway." He didn't take me to see the glass coffin that day, though I'd already heard about it. I'd heard about it the same way you hear about anything in that city. A story told twice, and the second time by someone who swore they saw it with their own eyes. They called her the Sleeping Bride of St. Roch. When the flood came in '65, Hurricane Betsy, the water lifted up a sealed casket and carried it like a boat until it wedged between 2 tombs. The coffin had a glass panel set in the lid, the old kind, a viewing window. Through the glass, they saw a young woman in a white dress, full dark hair, lace gloves folded over her stomach. Skin not gone to green or black, but pale as milk. Undertakers said she was preserved by the seal and by chance. If you believed other people, they said her eyes followed you. By the time the water drained, they'd moved her into a private mausoleum that didn't list a name and only caretakers had the key. "You don't want to meet her," Andre told me when I finally asked. He said it with a half smile that didn't reach his eyes. "They open that door once a year to check the humidity. That's all." I laughed because I thought I understood the difference between a story and a job. Then the September storms came, and the roof of the caretaker's shed blew off like a playing card. Lena took the call from a parish board member. Clean up the chapel, check the cemetery grounds, patch the shed roof until a contractor could fix it properly. We went out the next morning, humid air smelling like wet wood and lilies. The chapel was fine. The cemetery itself was mostly debris and toppled flowers, but nothing catastrophic. The caretaker, an older man named Boudreau with tobacco-stained fingers, shuffled around us asking after people we'd never met and misremembering our names. It was late afternoon when he asked if one of us could help him take a look at her. He said it soft, like he was asking us to move a box of hymnals, but he kept his eyes on the ground and his hand on the ring of keys at his belt. Lena shook her head and said she had to get the tarp set on the shed. Andre was already up on the ladder with a hammer. That left me, sweating through my shirt and not wanting to be seen as the kind of person who says no. "You don't have to go inside," Boudreau said. "Just hold the door and pass me a flashlight." The mausoleum was smaller than I expected, just a whitewashed cube under an oak whose roots cracked the concrete path. The door was cast iron with a cross cut into it, the inside shadow faint and steady. He fumbled with the keys while I balanced on uneven blocks, and I remember thinking how heavy the air felt once the door swung inward, as if all the heat had been stored inside for years and wanted out at once. The space was barely deeper than the length of the coffin, and the coffin itself sat on a raised stone shelf, black wood with dull brass handles. The glass oval in the lid wasn't crystal clear like a window. It was imperfect, bubbled, the kind of glass that turns light into water. "She's fine," Boudreaux said, and it sounded like a prayer, not a report. He leaned in and then hesitated. "Flashlight, son," I handed it over. He played the beam across the glass and then tapped the side of the coffin with his knuckle. The beam trembled in his hand, or maybe it was my vision. The dress inside was white, yellowed at the seams like old paper. Lace gloves. The hair was dark brown, thick, coiled like a rope on the pillow. Her face was angled slightly toward the glass, not quite touching it. The nose a clean line, the mouth soft and closed. It's hard to explain why I knew her skin wasn't wax. Maybe it was the way the shadows fell along the cheekbones, or the faint hint of color where a vein would ride near the temple. You can tell the difference between a doll and a person even from across a room. Your brain makes the distinction in a place without language. Boudreaux lifted a little metal dial from the wall, a humidity gauge. 61, he said. "That's high." He squinted, then clicked his tongue. It was 58 in July. He told me about desiccant and airflow and something about salt bricks. My mind was only half on him. The other half was counting my heartbeats. There was a faint haze on the inside of the glass. Not much, a ghost of fog. I was sure it was condensation you'd expect from a sealed environment after a storm. But the way it gathered along the lower rim made me feel like someone inside had exhaled and left a mark. "People think she's looking at them," he said abruptly, as if I'd said something out loud. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "It's the light, it bends. That's all?" He put the flashlight down and braced a palm on the coffin, like a doctor about to say something difficult. That touch, flat, firm, familiar, bothered me more than if he'd crossed himself. He didn't look afraid. He looked tired. On the way out, he locked the door and then checked it again, as if the last turn of the key had been only a rehearsal. I didn't mention the fog. I didn't mention the way the oak leaves seemed to stir without wind, or the faint scent that came as the door closed. A clean, chalky smell, like linens stored in a cedar chest. I slept badly that night. In a city like New Orleans, bad sleep has its own logic. Trains, sirens, a horn a few blocks away that takes the corner like a trumpet note. I woke once to the hiss of the window unit cycling and the stray cat yowl that bounces off the alley walls at 3 in the morning. I woke again to nothing at all, which is worse. When I finally got up at dawn and walked to get coffee, I saw Boudreaux on the chapel steps with a paper bag, tearing it into pieces to feed a pair of pigeons that looked like they'd outlived several caretakers. He looked gray as the concrete. He didn't show up the next day. We worked around him. Lena called, then walked to his little rental off St. Claude, then called again. On day 3, a woman from the parish office brought a different key ring and said a temp caretaker would check in by week's end. The cemetery doesn't close for the living to take a breath. That afternoon, Andre and I were picking branches out of a sunken corner of the cemetery where the ground liked to swallow flower pots. He stuck the shovel in and levered up a root, and under it was a ring. Gold or goldish, thin and simple, with a milky stone in a prong setting. Not a diamond, something softer. Opal, maybe. The band had a nick in it like a tooth mark. Andre turned it in his muddy palm and shrugged. "People drop things," he said. "People take things." He pocketed it with a smile that asked me not to say anything to Lena. Later I saw him turn it over in his hands again at the truck, and for a second he frowned, as if something about it felt wrong in a way he didn't have words for. The next morning there was condensation on the inside of my truck windows that had not been there when I parked the night before. It was a hot week with afternoon storms, so I told myself it was normal. That same day, Lena asked me to go into the chapel to photograph water damage near the altar, so she could send it to the board. It was cool inside and smelled like beeswax and old flowers. The wall of offerings looked back at me. A prosthetic hand, an ache relieved, a metal lung shadowed with dust. I took the pictures, and when I turned, a woman was standing in the doorway. She was my age, maybe a little younger. Dark hair pinned at the nape of her neck, a white cotton dress that fell to mid-calf, scuffed sandals. Everything about her looked ordinary at first glance, and then the second glance was the one that made my throat tighten. Her dress had the stiffness of new fabric that's been starched too hard. Her hair was pinned in a style not from any magazine I'd seen lately. Her eyes were the color of brewed tea and too still, like a saint in a painting. She smiled but didn't show her teeth. "Is Mr. Boudreau here?" she asked. Her voice was quiet but bright, as if she didn't quite know how loud she needed to be heard. "He's not," I said. "He's out sick, I think." "I'll wait," she said, and stepped inside, and let her hand trail along the wall of offerings as if it had been her habit for years. Her fingers paused on a polished cane handle. She looked at the candles and the donation box, then at me as if asking for permission to be there. I told her to take a seat. I told her I'd be done in a minute. When I finished, she was kneeling, head bowed. I didn't want to intrude on someone's prayer, so I went back out into the wet air and didn't think until later about how she smelled faintly like lilies, a slick sweetness that made the tongue feel coated. I ran into Andre on the path outside. He asked me if I'd seen a ring anywhere. He'd lost it. He tried to say it like he didn't care, but his brow was folded in the middle. "You took it off?" I asked. "It came off," he said. "We didn't find it." 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of wood moving against wood, the noise old houses make when they want you to notice them. I'd forgotten to latch the back door, and the wind was lifting it a 1/4 inch and laying it back down, lifting and laying. I got up to close it and felt the floor cold under my feet as if the air had a skin. I'd left a glass of water on the kitchen counter, and a bit of steam had condensed along the rim, making a crescent of tiny droplets. I wiped it with the heel of my hand without thinking, and the second my palm left the glass, fresh moisture bloomed again, not where my hand had been, but on the opposite side, like someone on the other side of the window exhaling. The next day, the temp caretaker came by, a young guy in a Tulane t-shirt who'd been told to keep an eye on things until they could find a permanent replacement. He didn't have the keys to the mausoleum with the glass coffin. "Those are special," he said with a half laugh. "Board keeps those. Liability." He asked us to throw away flowers that had gone to slime and set the cracked plastic angels aside. He asked if we knew Mr. Boudreau's family. None of us did. I walked the rows to check for branches and found the oak by the glass coffin dropping fat acorns like knuckles. The iron door looked no different than it had. I pressed my ear to the metal, and cold bled into the cartilage. I didn't really expect to hear anything. I tell you now that I am not the kind of person who goes looking for things to be afraid of. A bee bumbled against the iron cross cutout and fell away. Then from inside, the faintest noise, not even a sound so much as a change in the air. I pulled back fast enough to knock my shoulder against the lintel. I stood there in the sun with my heart pattering and told myself I'd heard the building breathe. On Friday, the parish office called Lena and asked her to take a humidity reading in the mausoleum. The board member who had the key was out of town. They told her where the spare was. Lena hates the idea of being responsible for anything other than the work right in front of her, so she pressed the key into my hand. "It's a gauge and a clipboard," she said. "You'll be in and out in 5 minutes." Andre offered to come with me, maybe because he didn't like the idea of me going alone, or maybe because he still felt the absence of the ring like a missing tooth. The afternoon was flooded with that white heat that comes after a rain. We crossed the little path and stood under the oak, and the air felt different. Clearer somehow. The smell of lilies was stronger. I thought of the woman in the chapel, the white dress, the old hairstyle. I looked behind me once and didn't see her. The key turned in the lock with a deliberate reluctance. The door swung inward and a wave of air flowed past me, cool as a cellar. Andre held the clipboard. I stepped in and clicked on my phone's flashlight, even though the small window in the door let in enough light to see. There's something about a glass pane over a face that changes your sense of responsibility. You are a stranger at the edge of it, and she is someone else's love, and that should be the end of the story. But the glass was fogged now. Not a ghostly haze, but a definite film, as if a breath had washed over it. You could see the wipe marks where Boudreau had cleaned it in July, low semicircles, and above them a new patch, smeared and then dried. I realized with a small, stupid shock that what I was looking at wasn't just condensation. It was the residue a person's breath leaves when you huff on a mirror to clean it with your sleeve. Andre read the gauge. 63. "Tire," I said. "Yeah," he said. "Maybe the storm." There was a hollow noise like a knock behind me, and I spun and hit my elbow on the stone shelf. The door had swung partway closed. I went for it, and it met me halfway, as if something on the other side had let go. It wasn't much. It was enough. "Let's go," Andre said in a voice that tried to sound amused and didn't. I took one last look, because that is who I am. The light inside the little box of space changed as a cloud slid over the sun, and the distortions of the glass made it look like her eyes were moving, tracking the light. If you stand in front of a portrait long enough, your brain will show you what it thinks you want. I pressed my hand against the glass and felt the chill of it through the wood, and the memory of whoever made it. The fog on the inside bloomed a little more, and a single droplet formed at the very bottom edge and slid sideways, as if the surface were tilted, as if the coffin itself were not perfectly level. We locked the door and returned the key and said nothing to Lena, because what would you say exactly? That the dead are breathing on the glass? I saw the woman again that weekend. I was carrying a box of trash to the dumpster behind the chapel when she passed me on the path, wearing a different white dress. She nodded the way people do when they frequent the same coffee shop. Not too much, just recognition. She wasn't one of the walking tours. She wasn't with anyone. Her sandals made no sound on the path, which is not a poetic observation. It is a fact I noticed because the cemetery is a place where sound travels oddly, high and thin. She was holding a small bouquet of lilies that looked fresher than anything I'd seen for sale that morning at the corner market. "Did you find it?" she asked. Her accent had that New Orleans softness that turns you into a listener against your will. "Find what?" She tilted her head. "The ring." "I didn't," I said. "My friend lost it." "Men lose important things," she said without malice, and carried on toward the chapel. I told myself she was someone's aunt, someone from the neighborhood who liked to sit in the cool pews and pray. I told myself a lot of things. That night I woke up to the sound of water in the walls and remembered it was just a neighbor showering on the other side of the shotgun double. I went into the bathroom and saw condensation on the mirror beating and sliding in tracks that made no sense with how air should move in a room. When I lifted my hand to wipe it, I realized I could see the whorls of someone else's touch in the fog, not mine. Longer finger marks, narrow palm. The shape slowly faded as the glass cleared, and I didn't go back to sleep. On Monday, Mr. Boudreau still hadn't returned, and the parish office called a welfare check. The police found the door locked and the fan still running. They left a note. People in the neighborhood shrugged and said he had a sister in Baton Rouge. The temp caretaker stopped showing up after his first week. The chapel stayed cool and the cemetery stayed there as always, and we were almost done with our job when I did the thing that I think about in the middle of the night. Lena had sent Andre to pick up lumber and left me to take final photographs for our report. It was late afternoon, that crude time when the sun comes low and mean under the clouds. I had the key to the special door again because the board wanted one more reading, and I don't remember the reason I told myself for wanting to open it without Andre there. Maybe I didn't want him to see me be uneasy. Maybe I wanted to prove I could be the person who does what needs doing. I told myself I'd be in and out in 60 seconds. The oak threw salt and pepper shadows over the path. I turned the key and pushed. The cool air breathed out past me like a sigh. I stepped inside. The light was weaker. I lifted the flashlight and felt my heart slow in the way that happens before it speeds up. The body's false calm. The glass was clear. Clearer than clear. For a split second I thought childishly she'd gone. She was still there. But something about her had changed, and it took me a few seconds to understand it. Her head was tilted a degree more toward the glass. Not much. Enough that the line of her jaw lay closer to the curve of the oval. The lace of the glove was not perfectly aligned with the seam of the dress anymore. The hair on the pillow looked a little looser, as if a coil had unwound itself a fraction. Maybe the whole coffin had shifted. Maybe humidity swells wood, maybe. I told myself I was going to read the gauge and leave. I moved toward the dial on the wall. The flashlight picked up small marks on the glass I hadn't noticed before. Tiny crescent scratches along the inner rim, as if someone with a fine ring had brushed the same spot again and again. My skin prickled. My breath went shallow. I heard distantly a door slam somewhere outside, the way sound carries in a cemetery. From the corner of my eye, something flickered. I have replayed this next minute more times than I can count. I set the flashlight down on the stone shelf to steady my hands. I leaned toward the dial. I heard a thump. Not a big one. enough to make the flashlight roll an inch toward the coffin and stop. The air changed temperature, cooler then warmer in a way that didn't make sense. I told myself I was going to take the reading and go. I turned my head toward the glass and saw my reflection first. Pale forehead, hollow eyes, distortion of the old pain. Behind my reflection, another face lay still. Beautiful and unreal, the skin like wax but not wax. Her mouth was closed. Her eyes were closed. They opened. In the tiny oval of glass, I watched eyelids unseal from the lower lids with that same almost audible tack noise skin makes when the humidity is wrong. The eyes were brown like burned sugar. The pupils adjusted as if to light. The moment was as long as a held breath. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I told myself I was seeing a trick of the warped glass and the quick of my own blood in my temples. Then the fog bloomed on the inside of the glass, not in a sheet, but in two distinct ovals the size and shape of a person's breath blown from a mouth an inch away. From within, the fog erased my reflection. I reached for the door. Why I didn't run first, I don't know. The iron swung inward instead of outward and clipped my shoulder. When I pulled it, it stuck, as if the earth had shifted under the threshold. The beam of the flashlight spun and settled with its glare aimed straight at the oval, glaring back off the glass like a blown candle in reverse. The eyes inside did not move like a living person's eyes. They didn't flick. They settled. They settled on me. Please, I said. I don't know to who. Please, I'm sorry. There are noises that have explanations only on paper. A knock is a branch. A whisper is wind. What I heard was the sound of a ring striking glass, a small tapping precise once. Again. A third time. Higher on the oval, as if the hand inside were trying to line up with my face. I put my palm flat on the glass, as if that would comfort anyone. The surface was so cold the nerves in my hand tried to retract. Something brushed the underside of the glass back against my palm. Not hard. The same pressure you'd use on a window to smudge away a mark. The pressure slid from beneath my hand toward the lower edge, as if tracing the curve. A filigree of fog unfurled under my skin. A milky fingerprint appeared, then another, then a third, but thinner than mine, narrower. For half a heartbeat that lasted a year, I aligned my fingers with the ones inside. They were not where mine were. They were slightly higher, as if the person inside were reaching up from a different angle. It broke me. I shoved the door. It stuck, then gave with a sound like a swallowed sob. I stumbled into the heat and the noise and the ordinary cruelty of the day and threw up in the grass. The lilies smelled like sugar gone sour. I locked the door. I checked it 3 times like Boudreaux had. I ran the key back to the office and put it in a drawer without meeting anyone's eyes. I didn't go back to the cemetery the next day. Lena sent me to a different job across town. Andre stopped answering his phone for a couple days, which wasn't unusual for him. But when he finally called, his voice sounded scraped thin. "You home?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm outside. He didn't come in." He handed me the ring he'd found earlier that week, the thin band with the opal. It lay in his palm like a small lie. "It was on my kitchen table this morning," he said. "I don't keep my doors unlocked." "You took it off?" I asked again, because repetition is safety. "It came off," he said, almost pleading this time. "I was taking the groceries in and it just slid. I heard it hit the floor. I saw it go under the stove. It's not there now because it's here." We both stood in the sticky heat like fools. He kept the ring. He said he was going to return it to the parish office. He never did. A week later, he told me he'd lost it again. He didn't look at me when he said it. I saw the woman in white one more time on a morning pale with rain. She was sitting alone in the chapel, the bouquet of lilies at her feet, her hands folded in her lap, bare now, no gloves, the knuckles pale as unripe peaches. I went to the back to check a leak. When I came out, she was gone, and the lilies on the floor were bruised where something heavy had sat on them for a long time. After that, I stopped seeing her and started noticing her shadow instead. The smell in the chapel that overpowered the old wax. The chill that held too long after the door had been closed. The way the mirror in my bathroom fogged in the shape of a hand even on nights when the air was dry. They never found Boudreaux. He had no sister in Baton Rouge. The parish board hired a new caretaker, a man with a careful way of smiling who said the door to that particular mausoleum was to remain sealed unless he was there, and even then only with another person present. It made me feel better and worse at the same time. One afternoon, I lingered by the oak and read the iron door with my fingertips like a blind man reads a prayer. The metal was warm. The smell of lilies was faint but unmistakable. There are explanations if you want them. The coffin could have shifted. The old glass could warp light. Humidity plays tricks on any building, especially one built for the dead. A person who has stared too long at a face through a lens will eventually see it move. A ring is small. Small things travel. A caretaker gets tired, forgets to call in, goes someplace else where the air tastes different and no one knows his name. There's a version of this story where I give you a date and a name and it all tumbles into something you can put your hands on. That's not this. It's more like waking from a dream you don't want to admit scared you, then seeing a print on the inside of your bedroom window and telling yourself it's yours, except your hand doesn't fit it quite right. I don't live in St. Ruch now. I moved a few months after across the river, into a place with brick that remembers different storms. The shotgun house has someone else's footsteps in it. Sometimes when the rain comes hard and fast like it does there, the mirrors in my new place breathe in and out. The first time it happened, I wiped the fog away with my forearm and saw a pale curve beneath the glass that didn't match mine. Now I leave it alone. It clears when it wants to. When people ask about New Orleans, I tell them what everyone tells them. The food is perfect, the music is better, the air knows your name. If they ask about the cemetery in St. Ruch, I say it's beautiful, and the chapel is worth a few minutes of quiet. If they mention the sleeping bride, I say I don't know anything about that, and I mean it the way you mean it when you love someone you can't help. Sometimes I dream I am standing in a room barely bigger than my own body, and the door is iron and my hands remember a ring I never wore, and on the other side of the glass someone breathes a soft circle that matches mine. In the morning there's a faint mark on the inside of my bathroom mirror, low and to the left, where a hand might have pressed as it tried to find the edge. I tell myself it's left over from the shower steam, something ordinary. I tell myself I birthed it with my own fear. The smell of lilies fades by the time the coffee's done. If you go to St. Ruch, be respectful. Light a candle if you have one. Don't touch the iron door, no matter how much you want to prove to yourself that you're not the kind of person who believes in stories. And if you find a ring, thin gold band, milky stone, nick on the edge, leave it where it is. Some people are good at making do with what the flood gives back. Some people are waiting on something small enough to carry in their palm. And some doors are meant to be held shut by more than a key. I'm not from Savannah. I'm from Texas, where the air has a different kind of weight to it and the cemeteries feel open, sun-bleached, and honest. Savannah is not like that. The streets hold the heat like a secret, and the live oaks lean over you like old men trying to tell you something they forgot halfway through the sentence. I flew in last summer because my best friend from college, Maya, moved there for a fellowship at SCAD. I promised I'd visit, and she promised me a weekend of food, ghosts, and cheap drinks on River Street. I said 2 out of 3 sounded good. I don't even know why I joked like that. I've always been the wrong kind of curious. The first night was just catch-up. We ate shrimp and grits in a spot that had a fridge from the 1950s and a fan that clicked like a metronome. I kept noticing how the windows fogged from the inside, how everything had a layer of moisture like the city was sweating through its shirt. By the second night, I brought up what I'd read on the plane. Colonial Park Cemetery, oldest in the city, headstones used as building material during Sherman's March, ground that refused to stay quiet. There was one detail in a comment thread that stuck with me like a splinter. Someone mentioned a grave wrapped in rusted chains, 27 links welded across the top. The name on the stone scratched out. No burial record. They said when a storm builds and the humidity swells, the chains rattle even when the air is dead still. The person who wrote it had 6 posts on their account and then nothing else, like they'd stood up from their desk and walked out of their life. Maya rolled her eyes. "You and your Reddit rabbit holes," she said. But she said it smiling, and the next morning she borrowed her roommate's bike so we could ride to the cemetery before the tour started. The entrance had a wrought iron gate and a sign that looked like it had been replaced 5 times and was due for a 6th. Park staff were sweeping the walkways. A tour group formed under a shady patch like a flock of tourists that had been instructed to pretend they weren't tourists. Everyone spoke in polite, quiet voices. In the South, even ghosts probably say sir and ma'am. We wandered past stones leaning at angles like bad teeth, past boxes that weren't really boxes but table tombs, their sides paneled with brick. Names from 300 years ago still had a certain smugness to them. The chains weren't on a map, of course, and I didn't want to ask. I thought if I said it out loud, the whole mood would change, and someone in a vest would tell us that was just a story. I wanted to prove to myself I could find it, that it was real because I walked up to it, not because someone printed it on a pamphlet. It wasn't hard. We started to notice which stones had pennies on them, which had seashells, which had the need of a story attached to them like a ribbon. The chained grave had no offerings. That's how it stood out. It was near a laurel bush that looked like it had decided to be a laurel bush centuries ago, and had never reconsidered. The headstone was waist-high and unremarkable except for the fact that some obsessive person had scratched the name off with something brutal, a chisel or a knife. You could see the grooves in the stone like claw marks. Across the top, embedded into iron rings that rose from the slab like vertebrae, were rusted chains, 27 links long, welded in 3 places. The welds were thick and ugly, bubbled metal that had cooled in nervous hands. It was a chain that didn't want to be touched and yet had been touched many times. We counted them because of course we did. Maya did it her way, quickly, twice, then made me do it my way, slowly with my fingertips skimming each link so I couldn't skip. 27 both times. It felt like a number a person had chosen on purpose. Not a dozen, not 3 tens. Something that stopped before it should have. It's probably vandalism, Maya said. Or an art project, honestly. An art project with a blowtorch, I said. We're in an art town, she said. We stayed there long enough that the tour group drifted past and then away, led by a woman whose voice carried well enough for us to hear phrases like yellow fever, duel, and unmarked grave. Near the chained stone, someone had stuck a paper straw into the ground, as if that would discourage the dead from climbing out. The air was thick. My shirt stuck to my back. There was a storm forming, one of those low gray ceilings that look like the sky wants to lie down. When I stood still, I could feel every bead of sweat, but when I moved, even slowly, it cooled me just enough to notice some other part of me was hot. We didn't hear the chains rattle that morning. We heard something close to it, though. A sort of humming vibration, like a truck passing several streets over. It could have been anything. Savannah is a city of cobblestones. Wheels talk there. But it made me think about metal under strain, about weight where there shouldn't be weight. I told myself if I came back at night, when the air was thick and the sky was low, maybe I'd hear the real thing. That was the first wrong thought I had. There were more to come. We were halfway to the gate when an older man in a city polo stopped us. His shirt said grounds and his face said he'd earned the right to make whatever expression he wanted. He had a broom that leaned on his shoulder like a friend. "You two looking for trouble or for a tour?" he asked. I got strong opinions about which is cheaper. "Just walking," Maya said. "He's got this story in his head about the chains." "The chains," he repeated. "They teach that now?" "No," I said. "Reddit teaches it." "The internet teaches it." "Oh," he said, like that clarified something terrible. "Well, internet's a lot like a cemetery. Good place to bury something you don't want found." We told him we'd seen the grave. He didn't ask which one, and I noticed that. He hooked his thumb toward the laurel bush. "We get people from out of town who cut at it," he said. "They bring bolt cutters or think they can pry up the whole slab. We keep an eye out. Idiots take souvenirs. They don't understand it's not a souvenir. Anything you take from here belongs to here. That's not just my opinion. That's the way the ground works." "What's the chain for?" I asked. The man shrugged, but it wasn't a casual shrug. It was the shrug you use when you're putting down a weight and pretending you aren't shaking. "Storms," he said. "Storms make the air swell. Makes it feel like somebody's breathing on you. Somebody who hasn't breathed in a while. People hear things when the air swells. Chain just gives them something to blame. I'm Harlan, by the way. I started here in '97, used to hate this heat. Now I just hate the bugs." I wanted to ask more, but he was already sweeping again. "They teach you to count the links?" he asked over his shoulder. 27? Always 27. People count them like it's a riddle, and you're the smartest person in the world if you get it right. That chain doesn't care how smart you are. We left because you can't stand in front of a thing like that all day without it doing something to you. On the walk back, Maya blew hair off her forehead and said, "So, you got your little story. Can we do something normal now? Like frozen daiquiris at noon?" I said yes, and we did that, and it should have been the end. It would have been if the storm hadn't sat on the city like a wet dog the whole afternoon. If the forecast hadn't made a point of showing the humidity percentage like a score you could beat. By evening, everything in the apartment felt damp. The towels, the paper on the fridge, even the air between us. By 9, thunder started arguing with itself above the roofs. Around 10, I said I was going for a walk. Maya looked at the window where the slanted rain made the world look like it was melting, then looked back at me. "You're serious," she said. "I have to hear it," I said. "You don't have to come." "Right," she said. "Because I'm going to let you wander into a locked cemetery in the middle of a thunderstorm to put your ear on a headstone." "I won't put my ear on it," I said. Not sure if I was promising for her or for me. We called her neighbor. Thomas, the kind of guy who collects friends the way cats collect porches. He had a rain jacket. He had keys to everything, or so he said. He had that Savannah confidence that comes from knowing the cops are just as tired of the rain as you are. We got to the cemetery just before closing, before the night shift pulled the big chain through the gate. The storm was a long, slow inhale. The ranger in the hut told us kindly to make it quick. We moved fast along the paths, our shoes slipping a little, our voices getting smaller with distance. There's a kind of darkness that belongs to the South, and I don't know how to describe it, except to say that it has color. This wasn't black night. It was a deep, heavy navy, like old dresses and church walls. The trees drank the light. We found the grave by the laurel bush. The chain of it looked darker now, both because of the rain and because of the way everything else had lost its outline. The stone itself had a sheen, the scratched-out name filled with water, and it looked like someone had written and rewritten the same thing there until the stone couldn't hold it anymore. We stood in a triangle around it because none of us wanted the front row seat. I didn't say the number. I didn't want to say anything that might count as an invitation. Thomas laughed once softly and then stopped, because the laugh didn't bounce back the way he thought it would. It just went up into the tree and disappeared. The wind didn't pick up much. It was one of those storms that doesn't care about drama. It cares about saturation. The rain was steady and the thunder was distant and the air was swollen. That's the word Harlan used, and it's the word that fits. You know that feeling when you try to open a door against a pressure difference and it sucks and pushes at the same time? It felt like that. The whole cemetery felt like a house with the windows closed and the air conditioning off. It started with a whisper, not the chains. Somewhere off to the left, past the table tombs, past the statue of a child that always looks like it's been crying. I couldn't make out words. I could only catch the rhythm, like someone practicing speaking again after a long time. Maya heard it too. She put her hand on my wrist and squeezed once. Not like she was scared, but like she was counting to make sure I was there. Thomas shifted his weight, and the gravel under his shoe made a sound that I decided was the cause of the whisper. Then the chain moved. Not a rattle, not that old movie sound you hear when someone drags a chain across a floor. It was a tight, dry sound first. A sound like fabric pulled over a rough surface. Then a quick clink like two links waking each other up. We watched the links rise a fraction as if something below had taken a breath. I can't say that without sounding dramatic, but that's the truth of it. The chain lifted and settled. Water collected in the shallow of each link and poured off in thin streams like fingers slipping free. Maya said, "Okay," to no one, and took a very deliberate step back. Thomas, who had been the least serious of us, went very quiet. He pulled his hood back so he could hear better. I don't know why that made it feel like the three of us were suddenly much more alone. He looked older for a moment, as if the rain had revealed the man in him underneath the guy we knew. The groundskeeper stepped out of the dark then. It was Harlan. He had a flashlight, one of those long ones that cops carry. He didn't shine it at us. He didn't shine it at the grave. He kept the beam on the path like he was honoring a rule I didn't know yet. "You should go," he said. "Gates closing." "We just want to hear it," I said, like a child asking for one more minute at the pool. "Some things you hear," he said. "Don't stop when you walk away." "We'll leave," Maya said, but she didn't move. The chain made a sound like metal teeth chewing on their own rust. Harlan exhaled. He looked tired in that official way old buildings look tired. Like part of his job was to be the person who absorbed everyone else's superstition. "People count the links," he said. 27. That's for the storms, not the number of people in anything, not the years somebody lived. I've heard all the guesses. The chain's not a calendar. It's a belt. It tightens when the air swells. The welds hold. That's all. But why weld it at all? I asked. Because it wasn't always there, he said. He said it like a line he'd been told he was allowed to say. He shifted the flashlight from one hand to the other. The beam slipped over the unruly laurel leaves and flashed on a brass plaque on a different stone. A name, a date, a little poem about sleep. He kept the light moving. "Who's buried here?" Maya asked. Records got lost, he said. Yellow fever years. Paper doesn't last in this city. Nothing lasts here except what doesn't want to. The chain lifted again, higher. I could see the links tighten against each other. The way a snake tightens when it climbs. Something below the slab pushed up just once, then stopped. It didn't feel like a hand. People always say hand. It felt like pressure, like a change in the ground, like the cemetery was swallowing and the grave was the throat. I took a step forward without meaning to. This meant the triangle shifted and I became the nearest person to the stone. I could see the cut in the letter where the name had been, how the groove held a thin, shining thread of rain. My ears filled with the storm, with my pulse with the soft friction of chain against chain. I don't know if this next part happened the way I think it did, or if my mind put things in order to survive it. I only know how I remember it, and I've learned that the brain protects you by making a door where there wasn't one. I reached toward the chain. I didn't touch it. I swear I didn't touch it. But the moment my hand hung over the nearest link, the entire length of chain tightened. It didn't jerk. It tightened like a breath held too long. Harlan said my name if he knew it, or he said hey. Or maybe he said don't. I can't recall the word. I only recall the tone. I froze. I've been in real danger before. That was different. This wasn't fear of being hurt. It was fear of being named. I don't know how else to put that and have it make sense. The air around the stone felt like a word about to be spoken. It felt aware. Not intelligent, not malicious. Aware like a mouth is aware it can open. The chain released a fraction and made a small clink. Maya grabbed the back of my shirt. Thomas said, "Man," in a way that had no second word attached to it. Lightning flash-washed the whole cemetery in white, and then in a bad negative. The chain threw a quick black shadow that looked like a grid across the stone, and then it was just a chain again. I took my hand back. Harlan stepped in front of the stone. He didn't look directly at it. He looked at me. "You count?" he asked. 27, I said. "Okay," he said. And the way he said it made me know there was a second question he wasn't asking. He herded us back toward the path with the old man's skill of not hurting at all. He just existed between us and the thing, and that was enough. The rain lightened, or the storm moved a little street over, or else we simply stopped noticing water because there was something else to notice. The gate was still open. The ranger in the hut had a radio pressed to his ear. We were halfway down the first block when we heard the sound behind us. Not a rattle. Not anything like that. It was a sound the city made when boats returned and tied up. It was metal under tension. You know it when you hear it. Harlan didn't turn around. "Don't count," he said. We didn't. We walked out to the street where the air smelled like frying oil and river mud. We crossed under the trees. We passed a couple holding hands and a tour group drinking rum out of plastic cups and a kid on a scooter who was too old to be on a scooter. And none of them knew the cemetery was doing something it hadn't done since the last time, whenever that had been. We went back to Maya's apartment and sat on the floor because the furniture felt like something that belonged to people who hadn't just made a bad decision. No one talked for a while. Thomas broke the silence by taking his hood off and smoothing his hair down. "That was stupid," he said, but he didn't sound like he was talking about us. He sounded like he was talking about himself existing in the same world as that chain. "I don't think the chain is to keep us out," Maya said. "I think it's to keep that from being named." "I don't know what that means," I said, and it made me feel like a door had closed in a house I hadn't known I was in. My flight home was the next day. I took it. It felt like running, and I don't mean that in an adventurous way. It felt like the cheap kind of running where you move your body somewhere else and pray your mind claims you followed. A week later, a small envelope arrived in my mailbox with Savannah handwriting on it. The looped script that looks both careful and secretive. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid, not a modern one. The old square kind that keeps its corners like it was born proud. It showed the chained grave from a low angle, like the camera had been held by someone on their knees. Water beads sparkled on the links. The scratched headstone looked freshly wounded. Across the bottom of the frame, someone had written in a steady, heavy hand, "Count again." I called Maya. She picked up on the first ring and said, "Did you get it too?" She'd gotten the same photo. So had Thomas, who texted her in all caps. None of us had told anyone else we'd gone. We hadn't posted pictures. We hadn't even told Harlan our last names. We argued about whether someone from the tour group saw us. about whether this was a cheap scare, about whether we should ignore it the way you ignore a bad dream and hope you don't have the sequel. I looked at the photo, at the links glistening with rain. I counted on the image, tracing the contours with my finger, ashamed of myself even as I did it because I'd promised not to count. There were 27. Of course there were. But the space on the left, near the laurel bush, looked generous. Like the chain had room to relax if it were ever allowed to. I called the cemetery. It took a few tries to get a person, and when I did, I told them I had a question about maintenance. The woman who answered sounded like she'd heard every kind of question from every kind of ghoul. I asked for Harlan. She said he was on leave. I asked when he'd be back. She said she didn't know. The way she said it made me think she did know but wasn't going to share. 3 days after the envelope, Maya called at 2 a.m. her time and didn't apologize. I went back, she said. I needed to see it in the day. I brought coffee for the staff and tried to be casual about it. The chain is different. What do you mean different? I asked. It's newer, she said, searching. There's a fresh weld. You can smell it. They patched it. The patch is ugly like the rest, but a different kind of ugly. Someone tried to cut the chain. There are marks. They smelled like lightning. I pictured bolt cutters. I pictured a person in wet clothes at night counting. I said the words I had been trying not to say since the photo. Count again. I did, she said, and to her credit, she didn't make a ceremony of it. 27, she said. Then she paused. Except, listen, it's 27 across the top the way we counted it. But there's a loop underneath that used to hang longer. It's tucked up now. It's part of the same chain. If you count that tucked loop, it's 28 links total. It just hides itself. I didn't know what that meant, and I still don't. I only knew what my scalp did. There's a particular crawl your skin makes when you're being watched. It's not imagination. It's evolution. I felt that. I looked around my apartment at the ordinary. Dumb objects that make a life. A ceramic mug that got chipped in a move. A coaster I stole from a bar, and thought about how many of those things had been once owned by people who didn't know they were collecting a chain. Maya told me she'd asked the woman in the hut about Harlan again and got nothing. She hung around the cemetery until a man with a dog told her he remembered a groundskeeper that fit his description, who'd worked there for years and then simply stopped showing up. You know how people just stop showing up in this town? The man said, like Savannah could misplace humans the way it misplaces names on stones. The next morning, another envelope. No photo this time. A single index card with wide-ruled lines like school. On it, someone had typed, not printed, typed on a real machine, 27 numbers, 1 through 27, each followed by a neat period and nothing else. The kind of list you'd make when you were planning to fill it in. Beneath the last number, a final typed sentence. Do not let anyone say your name out loud while you're there. I still don't know who sent it. I don't know whether it was kindness or a hobby. The fact that it was typed made my stomach turn because typing is slow. Someone took their time to put that together. Someone pressed a key for every letter of my address. There's an intimacy to that kind of attention that is not the good kind. I stopped sleeping well. At odd hours, I'd catch myself counting. Tile cracks, fence slats, the number of breaths I took between lights at an intersection. I'd get to 27 and stop no matter what I was counting. I'd move to a different object, start again, and then realize I'd brought the number with me like pollen. Maya texted that Thomas wasn't answering her. He had a job at a bar that overflowed on weekends, and he used to text back even when it was stupid just to say stupid busy. He wasn't doing that anymore. She went by his place. His roommate said he'd crashed on a couch somewhere and would be back with stories, which is exactly what people in their 20s say when they don't want to be the person who starts to worry first. 2 days later, the roommate admitted Thomas hadn't taken his phone charger or his toothbrush or anything, except his rain jacket and one of those long flashlights like the one Harlan carried. He'd told someone at the bar he was going to watch the lightning hit the river. I wanted to get on a plane. I wanted to stay where I was, very still, and not move for a long time. Both feelings were the same size. I went back to Reddit, to the same thread I'd read on the plane. The account that wrote about the chain still had 6 posts and then nothing else. I clicked the comments anyway. Every single one until my eyes hurt. In a subthread that had been downvoted to where it wouldn't bother most people, I found a sentence that made me close my laptop. It said, "You can tell how long it's been since the last time by the rust on the weld." That's nothing, right? Just words. But I smelled the weld in my head like it was a real smell in a real room. Maya called 2 days later, voice flat like she'd ironed it. "They found Thomas's jacket near the gate," she said. The cops didn't call it suspicious. The ranger said storms make people do weird things, stand near the fence to feel the charge in the air. She stopped. "I went in this morning," she said. "In the sun with people." I counted. Don't get mad. I counted without touching. I counted faster than I should have. I got to 27. The line was quiet long enough that I pictured the chain hiding its tucked loop. Pictured it like a tail folded up. I asked her the thing I didn't want to know. Did the weld look old? "It looked like it belonged there," she said softly. "It didn't yesterday." She asked me to promise I wouldn't come back. I said yes because saying yes is what you do when someone you love is standing in the rain on the phone, and the world is doing math around her. I didn't go back, but the city came with me anyway. It slid into those minutes when you check to make sure you locked your door already. It hid in the way the air in my apartment got thick before a thunderstorm. It taught me to stop counting other things and to count the silences in conversations instead. I'm writing this now because sometimes telling a story tamps it down enough that you can sleep. It's not to warn you away from Colonial Park Cemetery. People don't listen to warnings like that. They go because something in them needs to see the physical version of a sentence they've half heard. If you go, don't bring bolt cutters. Don't bring coins or flowers. Don't listen for a rattle. Listen for pressure. Count if you have to. But if you get to 27, don't say anything. Don't congratulate yourself. Don't give the number your voice. If someone is with you, don't say their name. In my head, I replay that moment under the laurel. The links lifting, the breath held. And I wonder what would have happened if Maya had said my name to pull me back instead of grabbing my shirt. I try not to wonder that for long. Curiosity has a way of making a space for itself, and sometimes that space looks like a link where there wasn't one before. I haven't heard from Harlan. Maybe he retired. Maybe he just stopped showing up. Maybe he took the chain off one night to see what would happen, and decided the world wasn't any of his business after that. Sometimes, when the air swells in my apartment before a storm and the windows fog from the inside like they did in that little restaurant, I put my palms flat on the countertop and try to feel the room breathe. The light flickers once. The old pipes tighten. Somewhere below the floor, a name I don't know tries to learn itself again. A week ago, another envelope. This one contained only a photocopy of a page from a book, one of those local histories with a title like Savannah's Quiet Corners. The spine numbers were cut off, but the page was about the cemetery. A paragraph at the bottom discussed vandalism and preservation. The word chain didn't appear anywhere, but someone had circled a sentence with a thick black marker. The sentence said, "Some plots are recorded simply as child unknown." Next to the circle, in the same heavy hand that wrote count again, someone had added, "If there is no name, any name will do." I don't know if that was supposed to be helpful or cruel. It did answer one question I didn't want answered. In the middle of the night, awake for the wrong reasons. I started reciting the names of the people I love in my head, and then I stopped because I got scared I was somehow donating them. I tried to think of a name I could waste if I had to. That felt worse. Now I keep my mouth shut in storms. There are people who believe a chain around a grave is about imprisonment, that the dead wants out and the living want the opposite. I don't think that fits. The chain is not a cage. It's a promise. It's a sentence with a period. It's a number that will always sound like it's missing one. It keeps a mouth closed long enough for the people in the city to finish their errands, to hold hands under oak trees, to carry plastic cups across cobblestones without spilling. That's all. The chain doesn't want anything. Wanting is a living word. If you go, pay attention to what your body does. Don't look for a ghost. Look for the moment your spine becomes a tuning fork. If the links lift and you feel the warm weight of air press against your face like the room is preparing a word, don't give it yours. Touch no metal. Count nothing out loud. Let the pressure be pressure and then let it go. Walk away before you hear the sound the boat lines make on the river at night. Walk away while the number is still a number and not a list. I haven't been back. I keep telling myself that's the same thing as leaving it alone. But you and I both know how the mind works. It puts laurel bushes where there aren't any. It tucks loops. The last time I talked to Maya, the heat had finally broken for a few days, and she sounded like herself again. She asked how the storms were where I am. I told her I close the windows early when they're coming, that I turn the radio on low to give the air something else to hold. She said she does the same. In the bottom of a drawer where I keep things I foolishly think I might need, I put the Polaroid with the others I took in college. It doesn't belong with weddings and dogs and bad haircuts. I know that. But that's where it lives now. Sometimes I take it out and force myself to look for a long time. I trace the links with my eyes and stop at the left where the chain has room to relax. I tell myself it's rain that makes it look like it's smiling. I'm not asking you to believe any of this. I'm asking you. If you walk past that laurel and the ground has that swollen feeling and the world seems like it's breathing on you, to keep your own name inside your mouth. That's the only thing I'm sure of. Names are doors. Some doors you don't open just to see what's on the other side. People say the chains rattle before a storm. They don't, they tighten. And somewhere in the city, someone stops answering their phone. Maybe they're fine. Maybe they're watching lightning on the river. Maybe they're counting something other than links. The number 27 shows up in your day like a stray coin. You put it in your pocket and tell yourself it's just a number. That's how we live with things. We categorize them until they agree to be ordinary. The chain is ordinary until the second it isn't. And then you get one breath to decide whether you want to be the person who names what you heard. I don't, not anymore. If you need a story, you can have mine. If you need a name to say out loud while you stand there, say your own inside your head and keep your lips closed. Let the storm do what it came to do. Let the chain keep its number. And when you walk away, don't count your steps. Don't give the ground anything it can use later. Just let the city be heavy and old and patient. Let it keep what it keeps. I'm not the kind of person who believes every creepy story someone's uncle told at a cookout, but I'm also not an idiot. People who spend their nights on empty highways learn to tell the difference between what's in your head and what's in the dark. You can smell the rain before it hits. You can feel a semi a quarter mile out by the way the air presses your jacket. And you can hear when the road is talking. That's what I told myself the first week I worked nights on the 20 bypass near Elkhart, Indiana. When my radio started picking up breath where there should have only been static and my boots felt the smallest, sickest little tapping through 10 inches of asphalt. It was late September. Most of the day crew had moved their operations east, leaving our little skeleton crew to baby the traffic barrels, keep the generator fueled, and watch a long black seam of new asphalt cure in the kind of wet cold that gets under your fingernails. Our supervisor, Ortiz, had split shifts in a way that always put the same three of us together. Me, Mike, and Lena. We were the ones who didn't mind the long nights. Mike was a welder in his 40s who wore the same John Deere cap even under his hard hat. Lena was 23, lean and sharp as a tent peg. The only one who drank her coffee black and actually seemed calmer after midnight. I'd been a flagger the summer before and had moved up to maintenance because it paid a few bucks more, and because standing with a stop-slow sign for 10 hours makes your brain leak out your ears. Nights on the road felt cleaner, quieter, honest. The first time I heard it, I blamed the generator. We kept it on a skid about 100 feet down the shoulder, just beyond a makeshift memorial somebody had built with silk flowers zip-tied to a guardrail. We'd laid a new layer over what used to be a narrow two-lane where, according to every local who had pulled over to tell us a story, the state had dug up that grave that used to scream. I'd heard versions of it at the gas station off Mishawaka, at the sandwich shop where they recognized the company trucks, and once from a guy in line at a liquor store who turned around just to see if I'd flinch. "You working near the old screaming grave?" he asked like he was talking about the weather. "Not a thing," I lied. "Never heard of it." He nodded like that made everything fine. "That was Elkhart for you." People kept their worst facts folded into their wallets and slipped them out only if you showed them your own first. The road that week was empty enough after 1 a.m. that you could lie on your back on the warm blacktop and look straight up at the stars, and the dark would feel like a lid with the tiniest pinholes punched through it. I never did lie down, not after the first night. I had wandered out to check the spacing of the barrels, counting them off by habit when my radio popped and hissed, and I heard 3 soft exhale sounds, one after the other, like someone trying to warm their hands. I pressed the talk button and asked if Mike or Lena was messing with me. They were both in sight, 30 yards down, talking over a clipboard. My radio hissed again, soft and breathy, and then died to quiet. "Generator's acting weird," I said, even though I knew it wasn't the generator. "Weird belongs to a machine. Breath belongs to something else." Lena shrugged. You'll get ghosts if you dredge up what you paved over. She said it like someone who didn't really care which way the scale tipped. But a minute later, she put her hands on her hips and squinted at the fresh seam where it met the old shoulder. They tell you the story yet? She asked. Every time somebody pumps my gas, cholera 1843, nails on a coffin lid. When they widened the highway in the 70s, they dug her up. Then they poured over it anyway, and everyone said the road screamed. Not everyone, Mike said. He didn't look at us when he said it, just kept writing numbers. My dad worked the crew that year. He said they put the coffin back, but not all of it. What's that supposed to mean? He capped the pen and tucked the clipboard under his arm. You got a body in a box and you crack it 135 years later. You don't get a lot of decisions you like. Some of that wood was mush. My dad said they lifted what they could and the rest went in a bag. He used to have a dream she was awake the whole time, listening to the shovel hit lid. He chewed his tongue at night. That's the sound he made. I told myself Mike loved a good scare, and Lena liked to look right at things other people kept to their peripheral vision, and I was just the new guy who needed a story to remember. But that same night when the rain finally came in a thin, cold sheet, the tapping started. I felt it through my boots as much as I heard it. A tiny tick-tick-tick you could blame on thermal contraction or the weight of water filling a stress fracture. I took 3 slow steps and it got a hair louder. I took 2 steps back and it muffled again. I stood still long enough to feel the beat of my own heart in my soles. It didn't match the tapping. Do me a favor, I said into the radio. Walk toward me. Lena came first, then Mike. The tapping didn't change until all 3 of us stood in the same place. It got quiet then, like it had learned something. You feel that? I asked. Neither of them answered right away. Then Mike said, I feel the ground tick like a watch. He bent, put a palm on the seam, then jerked his hand back like he'd touched a stovetop. It's warm here, that made no sense. The whole stretch was wet and cooling. But right there at our feet, the seam had kept some heat, like a belly in a blanket. If that had been the end of it, we could have chalked it up to a bad pour or a trapped pocket of air. You can rationalize anything if you do it fast enough, and you're standing next to someone who wants to be rational too. We stayed there a minute, talking about expansion joints and trapped moisture, and the idea of a pocket seemed sane. Mike fetched a steel rod we used to probe for voids and tapped across the seam like he was playing xylophone keys. Mostly it answered with a dull, healthy thud. In a 2-foot stretch, the tone went a shade hollow, like you might expect if there was a little space underneath. Air void, Lena said. Easy fix. Easy fix in daylight, Mike said. But he was smiling again. He loved a problem he could put in a sentence. We marked it with orange paint and finished the shift. I didn't sleep when I got home. I Googled the basics and found enough newspaper clippings to make a case either way. In 1978, the crews really did uncover a coffin near where the bypass is now. The headline writers were gleeful in a way people only get when there's a tragedy far enough away to be fun. There were also letters to the editor from people I didn't know saying their kids had trouble sleeping because they heard crying at night. A pastor wrote that the devil likes to imitate the voice of the dead. A woman wrote that if the state had to build, the least they could do was move the bones somewhere they were meant to rest. The county records showed a disinterment permit and a reinterment in a church cemetery across town. Officially, the coffin went there in one piece. Officially, I told myself this: if the tapping kept up, we'd core it, inject grout, and pat ourselves on the back. If the radio kept breathing, I'd take it to Ortiz and ask for a replacement. If the road kept warm in a rainstorm, I'd call it a fluke. And if I started hearing something like a cry in the crack between static, I would go home. On the second night, we set cones and signs and got the big light tower playing daylight in a circle around our stretch. The road beyond the glow dissolved into nothing. Bats looped above the beams, and once a coyote crossed 100 yards down, looked at us and trotted on. The tapping started up as soon as the night cooled. This time it was faint and steady, like small knuckles on a table. It seemed to come from the painted mark. Mike tried to pretend he didn't notice. Lena didn't pretend anything. She crouched and pressed her ear right to the seam as if she were listening for a baby's heartbeat. She stayed there longer than I liked, then looked up at me. "How many?" she said. "How many what? How many knocks did you count?" I hadn't, not on purpose, but my brain had anyway. 3, then a space, then a longer run. She nodded. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short, she said. You know what that is, right? I did. It was the lazy version of SOS people think is right because they've seen it in movies. It was enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. We're coring it now, I said, and I must have sounded sure of myself because both of them stood without an argument. We weren't supposed to do that kind of work without a plan and a test and a form signed by 3 people. But the road was still coned off from the previous pour, and the cores we had done earlier were clean. We pulled the rig off the trailer. The diamond bit through the top core slow and patient. The smell that came up wasn't anything like rot. It was wet clay. It was old leaves. It was the inside of a basement that hasn't been opened in a decade. At 6 inches, Mike switched off the motor. The core tugged out like a biscuit. He set it in a bucket and I bent to look at the hole. A breath lifted out of it, warm and damp. I pulled back on instinct. The breath stopped. We all looked at one another. No one wanted to be the one to say, let's keep going. The radio on my shoulder crackled again with that soft, hollow sound. Breath. Right behind it came a whisper I couldn't catch, the hissy, papery sound of lips that haven't had water in too long. My thumb hit the talk button without me thinking. Who is this? I asked. The whisper cut off. For a second there was nothing. Then a voice rode up out of the static the way a fish rides up out of a dark pond. It was small and hoarse and flattened by the radio, and it said a word I don't want to write but will because if I don't, none of this makes sense. It said open. There's a trick your brain does when it doesn't like a thing. It offers you a buffet of other things. Open could have been hope or nope or even a cough. I looked at Mike and Lena. Their faces said they had heard the same word mine had. We can't just, I started. Open it, Lena said. Her eyes were wide and dry. We can put it back. We'll document it. We'll make it right. Mike met my eyes over the rim of the hole. Something in his face had twisted into a knot I recognized, because I could feel the same knot pulling in me. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't mercy either. It was the desire to be the one who didn't look away. We cut a second core next to the first. Then a third. We made a rough triangle small enough to pry. It took both of them to hook their fingers under the thin bridge of asphalt and lift. It came up like a lid a child might lift off a shoebox. The hole underneath wasn't a neat cylinder. It was a gap that widened into a pocket where the old shoulder had settled. Dirt slumped at the edges. At the bottom of that pocket was a shape that didn't belong to asphalt or gravel or pipe. It was the color of old paper. It had a flat, splintered surface with a groove worn into it like a crescent. I got the flashlight under my chin and aimed it. The light came back off something smoother than wood. It was the bone side of a fingernail, long and curved, torn from whatever finger had worn it, pressed flat by time. The nails were aligned in a handful under that crescent groove, like they'd been set in a row or had fallen that way. The groove was exactly where someone would scratch if they were inside a box and the lid was inches from their face. My throat closed and a sound came out of me that I hope never comes out again. Mike put his hand on my hard hat like I might fold. Okay, he said softly. Okay, cover it. Wait, Lena said. She'd gone pale. Listen, the radio was quiet. The hole breathed in and out, the way the earth does when the temperature changes. In that breath was a noise like wet lips peeling apart. Then the whisper again, a hair louder as if the speaker were closer to the mic. Open, it said. Please. I still don't know if we would have done what we did if we'd been the only ones who knew. But we weren't. A pair of headlights rolled to a stop at the nearest barricade. A pickup door creaked. A man in his 50s in a denim jacket stepped into our cone field without waiting to be waved in. He had the unhurried gait of someone who felt he had a reason to be there. He took in the rig, the bucket, the 3 of us kneeling around a hole in the new road. You found her, he said. He said it like we had found a coin. His voice wasn't thrilled or scared. It was something like relief. You can't be in here, I said, trying to sound official, but my mouth was dry and the words didn't carry far. Sir, this is an active site. He kept walking until he stood with the tip of one boot at the hole. He looked down and then at our faces. Don't be mad, he said. I'm not here to cause trouble. I come at night sometimes to listen. I live off the frontage road. Been listening since I was a kid. What do you mean, listen? Lena asked. He tipped his chin toward the hole like he didn't want to point directly at it. In '78, they did what they could, but my uncle was out here with them. He told me they didn't get all of her in one go. He heard her after they poured. You can hear her better in the cold. I always thought maybe she was talking to me. Something unspeakable flickered across his face when he said me. Ownership, almost. I felt something I didn't like then. Something that had less to do with graves and more to do with how people love a tragedy when it plays the right song. What's your name? Mike asked, his voice careful. Ray, the man said. Ray Baines. Ray, we're going to close this up and report it. It's not safe, Ray's jaw worked. I got a crowbar in my truck, he said, as if we'd invited him to fetch it. Just let me out. No, Lena said. She stood and put herself between him and the hole. The beam of the light tower caught on the white of her eyes. We are not prying up a road in the middle of the night for a voice on a radio. The voice answered, not through the radio this time, but from the hole itself in a stuttering, strangled murmur that might have been breath moving through a passage forced by time and dirt. The word was the same. It scraped up my spine. Somehow I found a way to say, if we pull more up and there's a cavity, the road will collapse. Ray's smile went tight and slippery. She'll stop if you open it. You don't know that, I said. He took a step toward Lena. Nothing about it was violent, but it was forward. She stood her ground. Ray looked from her to me, then down to the hole. He crouched as if he was at a bar and the bartender had said something interesting. He put his ear as close to the seam as she had earlier. His face softened like tears might be on deck. You hear that? He whispered. She says, please. What I did next is the thing I come back to when I can't sleep. I'm not proud of it, and I am not sure I would do it differently. I stepped forward and raised my voice in a way that made Ray stand. It was the voice of every foreman who ever told me to move my ass. Out, I said. Now, he went. He didn't argue. He backed up with his hands raised like I had a gun on him. I'll be right there, he said, and pointed toward his truck. Don't do anything stupid. He drove away slower than he arrived. His taillights were steady and red and then gone. Pour the patch, Mike said. Plug it. He moved like he'd done this 100 times. He mixed a bag of cold patch in a bucket with his gloved hands. He tamped it into the hole. He pressed the biscuit back down like a plug and shaved it with a trowel. We painted a big angry X over the whole square. The breath kept seeping out around it for a minute after like a sigh into a pillow. The radio stayed silent. When the breath was gone, the tapping didn't come back. At dawn, Ortiz arrived with a thermos and a yawn and an eyebrow lifted at the orange paint marks. We told him we'd found a void and plugged it, which was true exactly the way a politician's promise is true. He checked the patch with his boot, nodded and told us to sleep while he found a crew to test it in daylight. I went home and tried to. I woke up to 27 missed calls. Half were from numbers I didn't know. The rest were from Mike and Lena. When I called back, Lena answered and said, "Turn on the news." Ray Baines was dead. His truck had been found pulled off near our barricade, doors open, crowbar on the seat. He had been struck sometime between 4 and 5 by a driver who claimed he hadn't seen anyone standing in the road. There was grainy video from a traffic camera near the interchange, the kind that shows more ghosts than people. You could see a man-shaped absence step into a lane that should have been empty. You could see headlights swerve and then brake too late. You couldn't see a face. I didn't go in that night. None of us did. Ortiz called and said the state wanted the patch cut and an inspection done with the county's historical society present. He said there would be lawyers. He said not to talk to anyone. I went anyway, just not into the site. I parked on the frontage road 100 yards off and walked through the weeds until the road's rim came up like the edge of a black ocean. The cones were still there in a neat line. Beyond them, the big light tower stood like a watchman with its head off. The patch we'd made was obvious even from a distance, a darker square inside a paler rectangle of fresh pour. I stood with my hands in my jacket and listened. The wind had a cold scrape to it that day. You could hear the distant punctuation of train horns and, if you stood still, the way traffic far off sounds like a constant held note. I didn't hear tapping. I didn't hear breath. I didn't hear the radio whisper open. I stood there until my feet hurt and my teeth chattered and my eyes watered from staring so hard. I told myself I would be done with it after the inspection. I told myself that if we were careful and decent and followed whatever rituals the living owe the dead, the road would go quiet again. I told myself I did not believe that a grave could scream. That was a thing people said because they liked the tingle, the cheap kind you get from a story that ends when you close the cover. They cut the patch the next day at noon. There were county people there and a man from the church that had taken the coffin in 1978. There were 2 women with clipboards from the Historical Society who looked like stern and kind, grandmothers at the same time. They watched while the core rig screamed and spit and lifted plugs like coins. When the last plug came free, the man from the church crossed himself. The hole opened wide enough to fit both hands. The county man leaned and shined his phone light into the pocket beneath, then cleared his throat and stepped back. He said, "We can confirm there are coffin fragments. We can also confirm human remains." One of the grandmothers wrote that down. The other wiped her eye. They brought in a small team who wore paper suits and spoke very softly even when their words didn't require soft speaking. They lifted the fragments and placed them in white trays. They lifted 4 fingernails that were the color of a page with old glue on it. They lifted something that broke when air hit it. It went to powder with a sigh-like breath. The man from the church whispered a few lines about rest and mercy. The county man signed a chain of custody so long it had its own bag. A news crew stood well back and filmed everyone's faces because faces are the only part of a story people trust. That night, the calls started again. This time they came to my personal phone and to my radio when I set it on the dresser to get away from it. It would click and hiss with the breath sound and then go very quiet and then pick up a whisper that wasn't a word. Mike said his did it too. Lena said hers didn't, that she had turned it off and then taken the batteries out. She sounded like she was sitting in a closet. The state finished the inspection and filled the pocket with flowable fill and poured a clean top course. They painted it with a fresh line that looked like a healed scar. The tap never came back on our shift. The radio never said open again. The road didn't go warm in the rain. I thought that would be the end, except when I tried to sleep the night after the second pour. I woke up breathless with my hand on my mouth and the taste of clay in my teeth. I went to the kitchen and turned on the tap and let the water run until it was painfully cold, and I drank it until my stomach hurt. When I switched off the light and stood in the doorway, I heard a thin sound under my feet like water trickling through a pipe. The building I rent is old. It's an excuse you can use as many times as you need to. On my next night off, I drove out to the church cemetery where the county records said the coffin had gone in 1978. It's small and quiet, not the kind of place with a full-time groundskeeper. The names leaned into lichen and the dates leaned into each other. I found the stone that matched the name on the record. Mary Ann B., born 1821, died 1843. Someone had left a silk rose there that had faded to a ghost of red. The stone had a hairline crack through the date. The ground around it was level. No sign of new digging or old. A man I recognized stood a few rows over. He wore a black coat he looked like he'd borrowed and a collar that marked him as the pastor. I only recognized him because he'd been at the inspection, not because I'd ever been inside his church. He nodded when he saw me and walked over the way you walk when you feel you ought to meet someone halfway. "You were there," he said without question. "I'm not here to bother anyone," I said. "I just wanted to see." "Of course." He stood with me and looked at the stone like people look at a fire. "What did you hear?" I thought about lying and decided it would cost me more than telling the truth. "Breathing, tapping, a word." "What word?" I told him. He closed his eyes. "People think they want to be the one to open," he said. "They want to be the hero in a story like that. They don't consider what they owe after. They don't consider that opening isn't the same thing as letting go." He left me with that. I stood alone by the stone for another minute and then walked back to my truck. On the way out, I noticed a small recent rectangle of darker dirt near the back fence where the grass hadn't fully taken. No marker yet. The kind of place they'd put a tray, maybe, for things that needed a new place to be. If this were a story I could package for you with a tidy bow, I would tell you that the cries under the road stopped after the new burial. I would tell you that the voice on the radio belonged to a woman in a box who had been declared dead too early during a cholera outbreak and woke up in the dark and clawed at the lid until her nails gave out. I would tell you we were the ones to ease her finally, to proper rest. I would say I sleep fine. Here is what is true instead. Some nights when there's a storm coming and the air presses low, the static on my radio swells and softens like someone breathing into a cupped hand. If I am foolish enough to leave it on the dresser, it will hiss and then pause the way someone practicing a word might. Last week, in the middle of a thunderstorm, it exhaled and didn't catch itself again for 10 full seconds, and in that stretch I heard a sound like fingernails knocking wood from the wrong side. When I picked up the radio, it was warm. Not hot, not dangerous. Warm in a way that felt like breath. And once, walking the repaired stretch with Mike and Lena on a clear night, when the bats made arching shapes above the lights, we all three stopped in the same step and looked at one another because we had felt something through our boots. A small tick, 1, 2, 3. We didn't say the letters. We didn't say the word. We stood there long enough to make ourselves choose to stand there. Then we walked on. People still ask about the screaming grave. They call the station in the county and my phone when it gets out that I work that stretch. They want to know if it's real, if we heard it, if we have recordings. I could tell them the truth and it would not help them. The truth is that some things learn to live in what you pour over them. The truth is that you can patch and fill and make smooth, and sometimes, when the weight of a car passes just right, or the temperature drops just enough, or the breath catches in exactly that part of your throat, you will feel the smallest message rise through your souls. The truth is I don't drive that way if I can help it. I keep thinking about Ray too. I wish I could tell you he died trying to help. I wish I could tell you he died because he loved a voice too much. What I can tell you is that he heard something for years and wanted it to be his. He stepped into the lane like the road owed him a miracle, and the road did what roads do. It took. Maybe that's the only open there is. Or maybe I'm saying that because it's easier than thinking someone underneath us still hasn't finished asking. 2 weeks after the inspection, Ortiz reassigned our crew to a different stretch nearer to the toll road. On our last night on the bypass, we packed the barrels and folded the high-visibility vests and rolled the light tower back onto the trailer. I took one long walk by myself, not with bravado and not with fear, but the way you take a last look at an apartment you're about to leave. The night was still. The seam we had cut and patched looked perfect. A semi passed a quarter-mile away and the air pressed gently at my jacket. I stood with my boots on the line where old and new met and let my breath out. For a second, it felt like the road breathed back. When I got home, I put my radio in a drawer and shut it. It still hissed a little through the wood. I opened the drawer and took the batteries out. It took the hiss a few seconds to fade, as if something on the other end had to notice. When the silence settled, it wasn't relief I felt. It was the quiet you get when a neighbor moves out and you realize the noise they made had been keeping you company. If you're asking for a warning, this is what I have. Don't make yourself the hero of someone else's grave. Don't be the person who thinks they know what open is for a voice that isn't theirs. And if you ever find yourself on the bypass near Elkhart after midnight, and you feel the road tick 3 times under your feet, keep walking. Not because something is chasing you. Not because the scream is coming up. Keep walking because not everything that asks is meant to be answered. Keep walking because you can and someone else couldn't. And the only prayer I know that has ever mattered is not the words we tell the ground, but the weight we take off it. I'm writing this because I need someone to tell me I'm wrong. I need a stranger to read this and say I mixed up the nights or the street names or the way light bends on foggy glass. I keep replaying it, and every time I think I've found the dumb explanation, I run up against the same 2 seconds that won't add up. You'll know them when you get there. I'm not a writer and I'm not trying to be dramatic. This happened in Salem, Massachusetts a few Octobers ago, when I was 29 and trying very hard to be normal. It started as a weekend trip. My girlfriend at the time, Kelly, was a nurse who never took time off, and my little brother Mark had just moved to Boston for grad school. I suggested meeting in Salem because it was halfway between our places and because October is kind of the thing there. We did the usual tourist stuff that first day. Witch museum. Apple cider that tasted like melted candles. Crowds of people in plastic capes pretending the wind was colder than it was. There was an older guy selling old maps under a blue canopy near the cemetery gate. He had the look of someone who'd spent a lot of late mornings with coffee and nobody to talk to. His name tag said H. Carey, and the maps were photocopies of hand-drawn sheets showing where old houses used to be before fires and zoning made everything sensible. He and Mark got into it about a half-ruined meeting house foundation behind St. Matthew's. Carey said the foundation was real, but people always missed it because of a fence and the angle of the path. He kept bringing up a grave, not in the main burying point but behind it, tucked on a little wedge of ground the city never annexed. He called it a mirror tomb, like it was something people would recognize. Kelly laughed and said every town has its mirror ghost story. Carey's face did this small tightening thing, like he had been waiting for a chance to say something and suddenly didn't want to. He dug around in a milk crate and pulled out a laminated clipping from 1901. It was an article about a grave excavated by workmen behind a churchyard wall. The stone was described as plain limestone with a recessed rectangle that once held glass. Someone had carved the words, "Look upon me and remember what waits." There was a line about the stone being moved to prevent vandalism. A later note, handwritten at the bottom, said the stone was brought back to the original spot in 1933 by concerned families. The word families had been underlined twice. He said he could show us where it was if we had the nerve to hop a fence and walk 5 minutes through an overgrown lot. I was the one who pushed for it. Not because I believed anything, because it was something specific to do and I didn't want to go back to the Airbnb yet and have Kelly ask what was wrong with me lately. The three of us followed him down a side street that leaned away from the main drag. We passed kids in capes, a cop directing traffic around a bus that had tried to take a turn too tight, a woman explaining in a loud voice that tarot gets misrepresented. The sidewalks thinned to patchy grass and cracked concrete. Carrie led us down an alley that smelled like leaves and rain blown into corners. There was a chain-link fence behind the churchyard, and behind that, a strip of land with low stones and scrub spruce and a ton of beer cans glinting like silver fish. Carrie swung the fence panel inward and held it for us, like this was something he did for people once in a while. It isn't technically trespassing, he said, but if someone asks you to leave, leave. He walked ahead with the careful lift-foot mind route steps of a person who already memorized where not to twist an ankle. After maybe 100 yards, he pointed to a flat marker that didn't match the rest. Most of the stones were tilted teeth, brown and thin as bread. This one was a slumped gray rectangle with a shallow recess in its face. The recess held glass, not intact glass, but the skin of it. Silver backing eaten away, brown at the edges like tea dried into a cup. Someone, a long time ago, had set the mirror into the stone when it was new. It had sagged along with the stone. A regal, sad mistake. The inscription was there, chiseled cleanly and offset so the mirror had room. Look upon me and remember what waits. Kelly took a breath like laughter was coming, then didn't laugh. Mark said he'd read about these in Europe. Memento mori. You look into it and remember you'll die, he said, then immediately apologized for saying it that blunt. Carrie said people claimed the mirror here worked a little differently. It was old silvered glass and old glass tells lies. It bends the light twice. I don't bring the drunks here, he added. People break what they don't understand. I stood in front of it and wiped a patch of fog from the glass with my sleeve. The world swam for a second, the way it does when you look into water and the water decides to be a camera lens. I saw myself and Kelly and Mark and Carrie. The background was a smear of dark trees and the church wall. Everything dragged by a fraction like a video call on bad Wi-Fi. It wasn't creepy. It was just old. And my brain told me I was seeing latency where there was none. Is it supposed to do something? Kelly asked. She had the nurse voice she used when she was humoring people, but keeping an eye out for mental breaks. Carrie said sometimes people see someone behind them that isn't there, but that's the thing with mirrors, isn't it? The minute you stare, the mind offers what you already suspect. He shrugged. I make $20 on maps. I'm not trying to be the haunted grave guy. He handed me a paper towel from his pocket and told me to be gentle if I cleaned more of it. He said he didn't know who paid for the replacement mirror or when, only that someone did, and that was probably story enough. We took turns stepping up and looking. Kelly said the delayed blink thing was real. Mark put his face close and said he could see a repair line in the silver. I watched them in the mirror and thought about that underlined word. Families and how the stone had been moved out and then back, like the dead were on a long leash. A wind moved through the lot and the dry leaves made the sound of paper being turned too fast. That sound will mean something to me for the rest of my life. Carrie checked his watch and said he needed to get back before the cops decided his canopy was an eyesore. He told us directions back to the fence and said, in a calm and careful voice, not to come here after dark. Kelly nodded and smiled and said we were not the kind of people who came to fences at night. She was wrong and she knew it. We went back to the crowds and ate fried dough and watched a street performer juggle knives. The rest of the day was nothing. A parade, a line for coffee that didn't move, a handwritten sign in a bookstore window that said the owner was tired. We walked Mark to the train a little after 8. He laughed at me for buying the map. He hugged Kelly a second longer than me, like he could tell we were leaving some space and trying not to notice. Then he was gone down the stairs and it was just us and the nice air that happens on October nights. We could have gone back to the Airbnb. We could have watched something stupid and fallen asleep too early. Kelly asked if I was thinking about the mirror. I said no. My yes must have been obvious because she said we could swing by. We'll just look at the outside, she said, like that mattered. We walked the long block back the way we had come, then the short one, Then the narrow alley with leaves and rain smell and the chain-link fence hovering at the end. The lot beyond was all shadow, and the mirror tomb was a darker rectangle among darker lumps. Kelly pulled on the fence and it gave the way it had before. We stepped through. I used the flashlight on my phone and kept it low, not for stealth, but because a narrow cone of light makes the world feel manageable. When you push it wide, the darkness has more room to show how much it contains. The ground was soft. The air had changed, damp but not raining, the kind of night that holds its breath. We reached the stone and I crouched down so the flashlight would rake across the inscription. The letters looked deeper at night. Kelly squeezed my arm and pointed to the glass. There were tiny points of light, like there were stars trapped under it. I raised the flashlight a little and the lights moved with me, slow and calm, not like flash reflections. I said it was dust trapped inside the layers, and she said dust doesn't drift like that. I looked. I leaned closer. The mirror was not like the mirrors in your house. It was a surface that almost wasn't one. I could see my face in it, and behind my face a dark space that wasn't simply the lot or the church wall. If you've ever stood in front of a window at night and let your eyes shift from your reflection to the room behind you, and then out into the darkness beyond, you know the way depth stacks up. This mirror made depth into a hallway no one had built. I saw myself blink. Then I saw myself blink again, a beat late with the tiniest smile I knew I wasn't making. Kelly saw it too. "Did you just smile?" she asked, already knowing I hadn't. She pulled me back a step, like distance changes whatever a mirror can do. We stood shoulder to shoulder and watched our reflections. We blinked on purpose and our mirror selves blinked with us, but if we relaxed and stopped testing, there was that lag again. It was small. You could convince yourself it was in your head. There was a sound then, soft and dull. If you drop a mitten on a wooden porch, you get that sound. A muffled thump. It came from below the stone, not behind it. We both heard it. Kelly said my name in a slow, flat way. I said it was settling. Frost heave does things to old stones. That was a dumb sentence because there wasn't frost and the ground wasn't heaving. I said it anyway. Another thump. Not a tap. A push like someone's shoulder meeting wood from underneath. We should have walked away. We didn't. I moved the light lower and saw the slab of concrete set into the ground in front of the stone, the way some graves have a porch so you don't stand on the dirt. It was smooth except for a shallow depression near the edge. A handprint pressed into the drying surface long ago. It had the shape of a real hand, not a cartoon. There were lines where a thumb had dragged. I put my hand over it because that is the kind of dumb thing you do when you forget you're a person. The size matched mine. That made my chest go tight. Kelly said she was done and stepped back and then forward again, like leaving and staying were fighting each other. She told me to shine the light on the mirror. I did. For one heartbeat, the glass showed only darkness, like it had closed its eyes. Then my face slid out of that darkness like someone bringing a picture close from far away. I blinked slowly. My reflection didn't. It stared at me with a small, patient expression that I recognized from times I had tried to look like I wasn't angry. Something pushed from below the slab again. My palm was still over the old handprint. It was warm. It shouldn't have been warm. Concrete is a heat sink and the night was cool. I flinched and pulled my hand up, and for a second I thought the concrete rose with me, like it had stuck to my skin. It hadn't, but the idea was enough to make me shake my hand to fling off a feeling that had no physical cause. We both heard whispering, not words. The shape of words, the way a whisper makes your ears reach for meaning. It came from the mirror and it came from the ground and it came from behind us all at once. I pivoted my phone light and the trees threw longer shadows and the fence was too far away. I felt something in my throat, the way you do when you're about to say a name and you realize you never knew the person's name at all. Then, very simply, the mirror showed someone behind us. A man standing between the low stones. He was too far back to light with the phone without turning away from the mirror, but he was clear in the glass. He was tall and narrow and wore a dark coat buttoned up to the neck. He had that slight stoop people get from winter. His hands were at his sides. His head was tipped, as if he were reading the back of our heads. Kelly grabbed my wrist. My reflection smiled a little wider. "Sir?" Kelly said. And that was when my stomach dropped, because she never calls strangers sir unless she's scared. We both turned. There was no one there. We turned back and he was still in the mirror. He did not move. He did not blink. Our reflections did not blink either. They were waiting. I don't know why I did what I did next. I stepped closer until my breath fogged the glass. I told Kelly to stand where I was and watch our reflections. Then I took 2 slow steps to the left, into the space where the man should have been standing if the mirror was showing truth. My reflection did not follow. It stayed where it had been, face to face with Kelly. The man in the dark coat in the mirror turned his head the smallest amount toward me. Not the real me. The mirror me or the idea of me or whatever waited there. Kelly's hand found my shoulder and squeezed hard enough to make my teeth click. "We're done," she said. "We're leaving now." The way she said now made me move. I took a step back toward her and felt the ground change under my heel. The slab had a hairline crack I hadn't noticed. My foot slipped. My palm hit the old handprint again as I caught myself. The warmth was stronger. It felt like skin under thin fabric. The dull thump came again, hard enough that the phone light jittered and threw Kelly's shadow up and away. For the first time since we walked in there, I felt something like anger. Not at Kelly or the mirror. At myself, for being the kind of person who thinks he can stare at a thing until it becomes only a thing. I stood up. I said loudly and clearly that I saw the trick and that we were leaving. My voice did something stupid and tried to be brave. The whispering stopped. The night got very quiet. In that quiet, something made a soft dragging noise under the concrete like a fingertip tracing the underside of a table. I pulled on Kelly's hand. We moved. 10 steps back to the gap in the fence felt like 100. I kept the light aimed at our feet because if anything is going to reach for you, it likes your ankles best. We stepped through the fence panel and into the alley. We didn't run. Running draws attention. We walked quickly and didn't talk. At the street, a group of college kids in face paint were laughing and slapping each other's shoulders. A police car idled at the corner, lights off. The world had not noticed that anything had happened. Back at the Airbnb, I went directly to the bathroom mirror like I was checking a fever. The light in there was unforgiving. I raised my hand, then lowered it. I blinked. I watched. Everything was normal. Kelly stared at me from the doorway and asked me to stop doing the thing with my face. I asked what thing. She looked confused and then said, "Never mind." We got into bed without taking off our socks and lay there on top of the covers. One of those childish fixes that works because it feels like it should. I woke up at 3 with my heart pounding. I don't know what woke me. The room was still. The noise outside was a soft river of far-off voices. The bathroom light under the door made a thin line. I thought Kelly was in there, but when I reached over, she was next to me. Her hand was wrapped around my forearm. Her breathing had the shallow pattern of someone dreaming badly. I sat up. The thin line of light under the bathroom door flickered once. That could be a bad bulb. I got up and pushed the door open. The mirror over the sink faced the hallway, so I could see myself in the strip of bedroom where Kelly was. For a long moment, nothing was wrong. Then my reflection blinked a second after I did, the tiniest fraction late. I told myself that in low light and with bathroom mirrors, your brain expects a delay because you've seen this on glitchy screens. I held my eyes open and counted to 5. At 4, my reflection blinked. A slow, deliberate blink as if to say it was tired of waiting for me. I sat down on the closed toilet because my knees were shaking. I said out loud that we were very tired, and we had spooked ourselves and that nothing followed us. I said that because that is what you are supposed to say. The faucet made a ticking sound like a cooling engine. In the mirror behind me, Kelly stirred and sat up, her hair a dark spill. She rubbed her face and swung her legs out of bed. She walked toward the bathroom and put her hand on the doorframe. I watched her in the mirror and turned to look at her in real life. The real doorway was empty. In the mirror, she was standing there looking into the bathroom. The look on her face made me think of being a kid and realizing you are not alone in a room you meant to be alone in. "Hey," she said in the mirror, except the real room was quiet. I said her name. My voice came out thin. The Kelly standing at the doorframe didn't seem to hear it. She moved her hand along the frame like she was feeling for a notch. Then she stepped forward into the bathroom in the mirror and reached for me. I was still facing the mirror. I did not feel a hand touch my shoulder. In the mirror, her hand rested there. My reflection's shoulder dipped a little under the weight. My real body felt nothing. I stood up so fast the bathroom trash can tipped. The Kelly in the mirror didn't flinch. She looked sad, the way someone looks when they were ready to forgive you and you refused it. She mouthed something. It might have been "it's okay." It might have been "don't." Then she took her hand away and walked backward out of the doorframe. In the mirror, the line of light under the bathroom door widened. In the real room, it stayed the same. I shut the bathroom light off and climbed back into bed. I didn't wake Kelly. I lay on my side and watched the slice of window where the blind didn't quite meet the sill. I listened to my breathing and hers. I put my hand over my own heartbeat and counted until the numbers didn't feel like numbers anymore. In the morning, Kelly was already dressed. She said she hadn't slept well, and we both pretended that was because of the noise. We got coffee from a place on the corner where the barista drew a leaf into the foam. We walked back toward the main streets. The sky was a clean blue that made last night feel like it belonged to someone else. We picked up the print Mark wanted from a shop near the train. When we passed H. Carey's canopy, he was taking it down even though it wasn't windy. He saw us and looked like he'd rather not have. His hands moved faster. He asked if we had trouble getting back to our place. I said no. He nodded. Then he said, to no one in particular, that mirrors get curious when you make a show of ignoring them. Kelly told me on the drive home that I had smiled in my sleep. Just a little. She said it wasn't my smile. She tried to describe it and gave up. Then she asked if I felt different. I said no. I asked her the same. She said maybe. She said she had dreamed she was following me through an empty house, and every time I turned a corner, she was a step too late. We didn't play music. The highway pushed under the car in a steady rhythm, and I tried to make the rhythm into a benign word. Later, living, laminate, none of them stuck. In the weeks after, the mirror stuff should have faded. It didn't. It didn't get worse in loud ways. It seeped. I would catch my reflection in the black of the TV and feel like I'd interrupted a conversation. I would flip the bathroom mirror to the other side and then find it angled back the next time. Not dramatically, just enough that I was in it. I started keeping my eyes open longer before blinking, and then blinked too much because my body needed to fix the strain. I stopped FaceTiming my brother because glitches make it impossible to know when you're creeping yourself out and when the service is bad. Kelly and I broke up that winter, not because of the mirror, not only because she said I was somewhere else even when I was in the same room. That was fair. I watched her mouth the words and watched the tiny delay in her eyes, the way you can see a thought finish right after the expression when someone is deciding to be brave. She moved out on a Sunday. I carried a box to her car and saw my face in the passenger window. For a moment, it looked a quarter second happier than I was. Then the feeling passed and there was just glass, and a pale person looking back who needed more sleep. I've gone months without thinking about the handprint and the pushing. Then I'll be in a hotel and the bathroom mirror will fog unevenly, leaving an oval of clarity like a face pressed to the other side. Or I'll be walking past a storefront and catch a glimpse of someone just over my shoulder, someone taller with a narrow coat and a winter stoop. When I turn, it's always only me and whatever is behind me. In the glass, sometimes my mouth will hold an expression I don't recognize for one extra beat. You can live with that. You can tell yourself you're noticing it because you're looking for it, but there are 2 seconds I can't fold into a story I'm not scared of. 2 seconds from a night last spring, in a grocery store parking lot, rain misting so fine it made everything look oiled. I was putting my backpack into the trunk and the car next to me had its windows gloss tilted exactly right to show my face in the moving lights. I blinked. The reflection didn't. I counted 1, 2. On 2, the reflection blinked, and in that tiny pause where eyes are closed, the mouth curled like a secret. When the eyes opened, they didn't line up with mine for a fraction of a fraction. They were a half-inch higher, like the person behind the glass had straightened. Then it was all perfectly me again. If you tell me that's how reflections work sometimes, I'll believe you. I want to. I want you to say old glass lies and new glass copies the lie. I want you to say there's a neurological thing where anxious people lose track of their own face for a second and assign agency to it. I'll say yes. Thank you. That must be it. Then I'll walk into my bathroom tonight and the little bevel along the edge of the mirror will catch the light from the hall and make a thread of brightness that looks like something written by a shaky hand. I'll touch the counter and swear it's warmer where my palm is, and I'll tell myself that's because of me. I'll raise my eyes and blink when I need to. I will not linger. Not anymore. But if you ever go to Salem and someone under a blue canopy offers you a map and a quiet path, and if you cross a fence and find a stone with a ruined silver backing and an inscription that feels like a dare, and if there's a shallow handprint in concrete that has held all the weather for 100 years, don't put your hand to it. Don't test yourself. Don't bring anything home that doesn't look like it's moving until it does. If you're already there and the glass shows someone behind you that isn't there, don't turn around first. Leave. Look upon it and remember what waits. Then let it wait without you. If it wants to follow, it will know the way. I used to think the most unsettling sound at night was the foghorn off the Casco Bay Bridge. It hits in this low, patient way that gets into your chest, like a warning that never finishes its sentence. That changed last October, when I moved back to Portland to help settle my mom's estate and ended up renting a cheap place in Deering. I work remote with awful hours, and when I couldn't sleep, I'd drive to clear my head. Gas was still cheaper than therapy back then. I'd put on a Red Sox game replay or a podcast, and take the side roads just to see the parts of the city I'd never bothered to explore when I was younger. On a cold Tuesday, 9 at night, my friend Dana messaged me an address and a pin. She grew up in South Portland and knows every bit of bad lore within 50 miles. "If you want to creep yourself out, go here," she wrote. "Old family plot behind an abandoned farmhouse. Look for the cradle. Locals call it the child's cradle. Tell me if you hear it." I thought she meant a cradle as in like a figure of speech. She didn't. What she sent me took me over the Presumpscot River, down a rutted dirt road lined with what used to be stone walls, and is now just mossy piles with sumac chokeholds. The sky was a hard dome of low cloud. The air had that smell you only get near the ocean in mid-fall, briny and metallic like coins and wet kelp. The road ended at a gate made of 2 boards wired with rust. A no trespassing sign leaned against a tree where someone had painted eyes on the knots. The farmhouse was a black shape against the blur of trees. Its roof collapsed in the middle. The porch had caved on one side, but on the other it was still held up by a pair of stubborn posts, the railing broken into teeth. My headlights caught the tail of a feral cat that darted underneath, and when I cut the engine, the night came down on the car like a blanket. No cicadas, no traffic, just the wind scraping something in the weeds. I climbed out with my phone light and a stupid confidence that comes from thinking real danger is never where you are. The plot was exactly where Dana said it would be, behind the house, past the toppled chimney where the land dipped into a little hollow. You wouldn't know it was a graveyard if not for the stones. There were maybe 8 of them, crooked and listing. The tallest had an angel whose face had been erased by weather. I walked between wild rose bushes and dead goldenrod, and the light fell on something that made my skin pull tight over my arms. It was a cradle. A tiny wooden cradle nailed straight down to a grave. It wasn't a modern crib. It was the size you'd keep beside a bed. Hand-built, bowed runners turned up like a smile. Most of the paint had peeled away, but you could still see the ghost of a pale blue. Each runner had 3 heavy nails driven through into the granite slab that served as a base for the grave. The nails were old and mushroomed at the heads. It looked like someone had tried to lift it and failed. The grave itself had a marker the size of a book, and I had to wipe it with my sleeve to read the name. Alma, it said, no dates. Below that faint were 4 more letters and then a gouge where the stone had split. Har, and then nothing. I heard the first creak before I felt the wind shift. A hinge in a door, a swing, something wood against wood. The kind of sound that has its own rhythm. You know how a rocking chair sounds different when someone is in it, versus when it's just moving because you bumped it. This was the first kind. A slow pull and return. I told myself it was a branch in a tree. Then I shone my phone back on the cradle and watched it move. There was no breeze. Nothing around me shifted. The little cradle rocked, maybe an inch back, an inch forward, as if someone had just set it going with the lightest push. I stood there so still my teeth hurt. If I'd been with someone else, I would have joked, because joking is how you break a spell. Alone, I did the other thing. I whispered hello like an idiot. The cradle slowed. The creak stretched out and went quiet at the forward end, where it would have stopped. I felt an ache in the cold that had nothing to do with temperature. Like the space on my right side was suddenly a vacuum that wanted me to make room. I backed up with short steps until my calf hit a stone. Then I ran. I ran over the crunchy dead grass, past the house with its black windows, into the narrow car and slammed the lock with my palm. Dana picked up on the second ring. You heard it, she said, not a question. I told her about the cradle, and she made a satisfied little noise that told me she believed everything already. So the story, she said. Back when that farm was still a farm, late 1800s, they buried a baby who died in January. The mother came out every night to rock the cradle because she swore the baby kept crying. People in town heard it, but nobody said anything because everyone was weird about grief then. One night she never went home. They found her curled beside the grave with frost on her hands and her dress stuck to the stone. It's probably not true, but people say you still hear the creak on still nights. And sometimes when it's very cold, you see handprints on the cradle. You could have led with the part where someone died, I said. It came out too loud and too bright. She laughed and asked if I'd filmed it. I had without realizing. When I checked later, the video would show a jitter of light and the cradle moving. And then the screen would smear white and gray like someone breathed on the lens. The audio wouldn't be the creak. It would be an odd, soft sound. Higher than the wind, the exact pitch babies hit when they are too tired to cry hard and just want to be held. It would make my stomach twist so hard I had to sit down. I didn't go back the next night. I didn't plan to go back at all. But fear has the strangest way of arranging your days. It makes grooves for your thoughts to run in, and after a few days the grooves pull you more than you steer yourself. I started hearing things when I slept. Not nightmares, little domestic sounds that didn't belong to my apartment. A chair foot scudding on a floor, the light bump of something against a wall, a shush in the hallway. The foghorn grew more distant and the soft creak I'd heard in the hollow grew clearer. One night at 2 a.m, my downstairs neighbor texted me and asked if I could keep my furniture moving to daylight hours because he had to be up at 5. I hadn't moved anything. His message made my jaw clench. I brought it up in the building group chat, hoping to triangulate the sound with humor, and got back a picture from a woman on the first floor. It was my front door taken from the hallway. Under the door, in the gap where the weather strip had peeled, there was a sliver of light from my side. In the center of it was a shadow, a moving one that went left and then right and then stopped. "Is someone in there with you?" she wrote. I typed that I was alone and left it at that. On Saturday, Dana came over with a baby monitor. Her idea. "I want to try something," she said. "If I'm wrong, we delete the files, and this is just a weird sleepover that we don't mention." She set the monitor up on my coffee table and put the other end in a tote bag with a battery pack. "We go back out there with this in turned on mode and leave the parent unit with you here and see if it picks up anything." I told her it was a bad idea. Then I pulled on my coat. Driving back was worse because I knew it was there. The gate looked smaller. The house seemed to lean more. We went on foot through the weeds. There were new prints in the mud that could have been a raccoon or a person in small boots. The cradle sat where it had been nailed, and a crow hopped on one of the stones and watched us like we were making a deal. Dana talked to fill the air, and I wanted to tell her to be quiet, to respect whatever made this place feel like a mouth about to speak. But hearing her voice anchored me enough to keep moving. We tucked the baby monitor's smaller unit between the stones near the head of the grave, half hidden under a hank of dead grass. Dana checked her phone to make sure the signal was strong and put a hand on my arm. "Listen," she said. I heard only wind. It would have been a relief if she had been wrong. It would have made the rest of this family plot a normal sad place. But from the monitor's speaker in my tote, the smallest sound came through, tinny and close. The creak in real time, we left it running. I could feel it vibrating through the canvas of the bag as we walked back to the car. Every 10 steps the creak would come, then go, then come. On the drive back, she kept glancing at the little green lights that flickered up and down as the monitor picked up noise. "We should not be doing this," I said at a stoplight. She nodded but didn't say to turn around. We sat in my living room and listened. At first, seeing the creak translated through plastic and LED strips took some of the feeling out of it. It turned what had felt like a private grief into an amateur radio station. But the longer it went, the stranger it got. The rhythm changed. Think of a swing that someone is pushing not with hands but with their knee pressed against the seat. Just a little. Slow, slow, then faster for 2 pushes. Then a pause that was not a pause so much as someone leaning their weight in to rest. The creak was joined by something like a finger skidding over wood. Dana put her phone face down. I muted the TV. There was a little exhale. Just air over plastic, but so close I could hear the wetness. The hair on the back of my neck passed from standing up to trying to crawl off my skin. "Let's go get it," I said, ready to bolt. Dana said, "Wait. If we go now, we're just going to scare ourselves." Let's give it an hour. The hour turned into 2 because somewhere after midnight the creak receded. It didn't stop. It stepped away like whoever was there had stood up. Both green lights dropped to a low glow. The room felt full of a different kind of thing, a patience that might harden into anger, so we drove back with the heater on high and our mouths tight. At the plot, the wind was sharper. There was no moon. Our flashlights tilted the ground into a tunnel. We followed the narrow path our earlier steps had made, and halfway to the cradle, Dana stopped so suddenly I bumped her shoulder. "Do you see that?" she asked. On the runner of the cradle, where it arched up like a smile, a pale shape showed. It wasn't a handprint like the ones you see on muddy windows. It was white, delicate as frost. 5 small ovals and a palm shape, pressed on so lightly they were more like the absence of color than an addition. They were higher than a baby could reach unless someone held them there. Dana took 2 photos and I took none. In the same way you don't look directly at the sun, I didn't look straight at the cradle for long because it needed me to. The cold pushed into my sleeves until my fingers burned. We retrieved the monitor and left. After we shut the car doors and turned the engine, I felt something release in my shoulders. It had been the idea that I was expected to stay. The idea faded as soon as we put physical distance between ourselves and that hollow. But I had the wrong idea about what distance matters. At 3 in the morning, I woke to a gentle noise from the living room. I thought it was the heater. It was the baby monitor on the coffee table, which we had left on and forgotten about. The smaller unit sat in the tote bag on my kitchen counter. The parent unit on the table showed 3 green bars, strong signal. The creeping thing that moves through an apartment at night had moved into my chest and found a home there. I went to the counter and opened the bag. The other unit lay on its side, little speaker holes facing up. I switched it off and the room got too quiet. In the quiet, under the usual fridge hum and street tires hissing, something in the hallway gave a single creak. I pretended not to hear it and slept with the TV on. Dana wanted to take the audio to a guy she knew who did sound for the State Theater to see if there was anything distinct in the pattern. I didn't want to hand the file off and make it a party trick, but I also didn't want to hold it alone. We sat with him the next day at a diner on Forest Avenue. He brought his laptop and the kind of headphones you see on studio engineers. He listened with a frown that deepened slowly. He said the creak frequency sat right where you'd expect old pine to voice when it flexes, but the pattern had human artifacts. He didn't say the word rocking because he didn't need to. At 2:18, whatever is making the noise stops, and there's this. He replayed 2 seconds. It was the softest scrape of skin on wood, then a sound like a cuff brushing against fabric that had frozen edges. Also, he said, there's a tone in here I can't place. It rides under the creak. It's between breath and a whistle. It's a pitch you get when someone is trying not to cry. That caught me off guard. He took off the headphones and said he didn't want a copy. This is not my thing. You two should stop going out there, he said. He's the kind of person who laughs when he's nervous. He didn't laugh. The next days had the kind of small life things that convince you you've imagined the big thing. Work emergencies. A grocery run where you run into someone from high school and pretend to be happy to see them. A burst pipe in the building that soaked the hallway carpet and made the whole place smell like wet cardboard. I didn't think about the cradle every hour, but when I opened my front door, I started noticing a mark on the inside of the wood. At first, I thought the movers had done it. It was a pale half moon about waist height. It grew into an oval the size of a palm. In certain light, 5 smaller ovals showed above it, faint as breath on glass. I didn't take a picture. I wiped it with warm water and soap, and the shape came back within an hour, a little higher. The next morning, it sat higher still, as if whatever left it had stood on tiptoe. Dana came over and held her hand up beside it. Her hand was larger. The print on the door would have belonged to someone not fully grown. I know the next choice I made sounds stupid. You can say that from your couch with your sense of yourself steady and clear. It's different when your reality buckles just a little. You do the thing that pushes it back. I bought a small wooden cradle at a thrift store on Washington Avenue, the kind people keep teddy bears in. I brought it home, set it near the couch, and sat with it like somebody sits with an apology they aren't sure how to speak. The house felt less taut when I did. That night, the building was quiet. Around 1, the hallway creaked once in a way that sounded less like a wait and more like a long step taken by someone who is careful not to wake anyone. The next day, I called a city clerk to see if I could pull old records from the farmhouse property. A woman named Marlene answered and said I'd have to come in person to dig through deeds and old obituaries. She was kind in a way that made me feel worse. When I told her the name on the small stone, she had nothing to match it. "We've got a Harrington family that farmed out there," she said, "but no infant listed as Alma. It wasn't unusual then to bury babies without much paperwork. I'm sorry." She paused, then added like she couldn't help herself. "My mother used to tell me not to play down by that house. Said there were old unmarked graves in the dirt where the laundry line was. She said you could hear them sometimes when the air sat right." She cleared her throat and asked if I still wanted to come in. I told her I might. The thing you have to understand is that the story didn't feel like a haunting. It felt like a demand, not a violent one. A maternal one from the other direction. "Hold this for me. You don't have to fix it. Just hold it." Some people can do that. I'm not those people. The second Tuesday after my first visit, a wind blew in from the water that had grit in it. I tasted it if I licked my lips. The foghorn went and went all evening, and then stopped suddenly around midnight like someone had cut the power. And in the absence of that long tone, the building breathed. My neighbor's baby coughed. Someone flushed a toilet. The wind nudged the bathroom vent cover. I lay awake with my elbows burning under the blanket. Around 1, the cradle by the couch moved. It didn't rock exactly. It went forward and stopped, then back and stopped like someone learning the motion. The wood gave a tiny creak. I sat up. I said without thinking, "It's okay." The air in the apartment moved. It didn't get colder. It got thinner. The next part is the part I can't fix with jokes or with rationalizations about old wood. I watched the new cradle rock for maybe a minute. Then it stopped and there was the softest exact sound of a hand patting fabric. 1, 2, 3. Very small. The sound of a mother making a rhythm so a baby can find sleep. It wasn't my rhythm. It was older. It had a patience I don't own. Somewhere in the hallway, a person walked by without stopping. I sat to the end of that pattern and then lay down on the floor with my cheek on the rug because standing felt disrespectful. I woke there at 6 to my phone buzzing with a message from Dana asking if I was okay. I said yes and meant it for the first time in a week. She wanted to go out there one more time. Not to poke the thing or record it, just to see if we could do something like maintenance. Clean the stones. Clear the weeds. Fix a boundary. You can love something without making it your job, she said. We took gloves and a bag of sand to grit the moss off the markers and a stiff brush. The yard had a brittle shine to it the way fields do when the cold goes deep. And the air was a wet knife. We made noise with purpose. We cleared the little path so it didn't feel like we were sneaking. We brushed the angel and found its face again. Not gentle or sad, but determined. We picked the dead rose canes away from the small stone that said Alma and the not quite name below it. We spoke in regular voices about regular things, and I felt the hollow shift under my feet. Not in a supernatural way, in the way a place loosens when people work together there and put it back a little closer to what it was meant to be. Before we left, Dana took a little length of ribbon from her pocket. "It's nothing," she said. "My grandmother used to tie red thread on gateposts so the wind wouldn't carry the good out." She tied it to the cradle's footboard. The knot was simple and strong. There was a tiny white mark beside where her fingers had held the wood. I didn't point it out. We were 10 steps away when a sound like a laugh came from the field beyond the trees. A man's laugh, not close, not joking. The kind that says there are more people than you can see. A minute later, an ATV engine started and went off toward the road on the other side. We looked at each other and walked faster. In the car, I realized my hands were shaking hard enough to blur the keys. If someone else had been out there with us, we hadn't seen them. If someone else had been watching the cradle, they hadn't made themselves known until we were leaving. The cold sank between my shoulder blades and settled. That night the foghorn stayed silent. The building's noises took on a soft, hazy quality, like the air put cotton around every edge. I fell asleep early and woke at 3 with my heart rolling. The living room glowed a little from the streetlights. The thrift store cradle sat still and empty. My front door was closed. On the inside, where the pale prince had climbed, there were now 2 sets. One at the height they'd reached before, one lower, smaller. They weren't new. They looked like they had always been there and I had only just learned how to see them. I didn't leave town after all that. People always end these stories by saying they packed and ran, or they refused to go back to the place, and I get it. I don't have a clean ending to offer. I still drive sometimes, but I don't go down that dirt road. When I pass near that part of the city, my chest tightens in a way that is not exactly fear. It's more like when you remember a task you forgot that only you can do. Dana and I have a rule that we don't talk about it at parties. We don't talk about it at all unless the weather is held at a steady stillness for a day, and the air sits like glass. We text each other an ear emoji and a question mark, and one of us says, "Not tonight." There are small changes that make me think I was noticed. In my apartment, the hallway creaks now only when my neighbor's baby wakes, as if whoever followed me home stopped walking when he sleeps. The cradle by the couch has a notch in one runner shaped like a thumbnail pressed and worried there, the way someone worries a wedding ring. The ribbon Dana tied at the plot is probably gone. The wind would have it by now. When it storms in off the bay, I hear the foghorn again, and it sounds normal. On still nights, if I switch off the fridge's hum and the heater's breath and the fan's low tremble, I can hear one more thing. Not a creak, not here. It's smaller than that. The softest pat, 3 times patient. Coming from nowhere in particular, like the sound the air makes when it gives up trying to keep the living and the dead politely apart. Once in a while, late and careful, an email will come in from someone who found the old video Dana made me send her, the one where the cradle moves and the lens breathes white, and they'll ask if I faked it. They want to hear that there was fishing line or that it was a cat. Sometimes they want to go see it. I say the truth. I don't know what I caught on my phone. I don't recommend visiting the place. If you go and you hear it, you'll want to make it make sense in your own house later, and the best way to do that is to bring a small cradle into your living room and sit with it while your neighbors sleep. And if you sit quietly enough, long enough, you will start to hear what you're holding, and you might understand why a mother stayed with that grave until the cold took her hands and the world went quiet around her. Or you might not. Either way, the thing will know you heard, and it will not let itself be nobody's job anymore. I didn't go to Amarillo to chase a ghost light. I went because my cousin Mason asked me to help him haul the last of his dad's stuff out of a storage unit before the lease ran out. It was November, dry and wind-chapped, the kind of panhandle week where daylight feels bleached. I took a few extra days off, drove up from Austin, and told myself it would be good to see family and eat brisket, and maybe walk the rim of Palo Duro Canyon if the wind didn't make it miserable. The lantern came up the second night, after we'd finished moving boxes and were sitting on the tailgate of Mason's truck outside a Whataburger. He was tired in the face but jittery the way he gets when he's holding a story back. He kept glancing over my shoulder at nothing in particular, like he was practicing how he would say it. "You know about the lantern grave?" he asked. "Out east past the old wind farm." I didn't. I'd heard all the usual Amarillo tales, Cadillac Ranch, the roadside crosses that multiply after a bad wreck, but not that one. Mason said there was an unmarked grave on a rise of caliche dirt, fenced with bent barbed wire, and a wrought iron lantern staked beside it. The flame never went out. People had tried to smother it, hurricane it with buckets, whatever. Nothing worked longer than a breath. During the Depression, families would walk their crying babies past it so they could sleep by the time they got home. The old line was that the light belonged to a man who got caught in a blue norther and froze out there, still trying to find the road by the glow of his lantern. If you took a picture at the wrong moment, the film showed a shape kneeling beside the grave, mouth open like he was praying or warning somebody off. Place was extra weird these last months, Mason said, tapping his drink lid. Wind doesn't touch it. Like you stand there and it's whipsawing mesquite all around, but the flame just sits there. He told me we should go. He said it casually, like we were talking about a late movie. That was how I knew it was already in his head in a way he didn't want to admit. He'd started driving out to it after shifts, sitting in his truck counting minutes. He had photos on his phone that showed nothing special, just a blurry orange bead in the dark. But he insisted the camera wasn't the point. You had to be there. You had to listen. We drove after midnight when the wind had dropped to a hiss. Amarillo's glow fell behind us and the horizon opened. The road was one of those county-maintained strips that feels like it was rolled out on a dare. 2 lanes, faded centerline, brittle shoulders leading into a black sea of scrub. A radio preacher sizzled in and out, the kind of AM that sounds like it's being beamed from a bunker. Mason cut it and we rode in silence, the truck shivering now and then as if a crosswind had made a fist around it. We turned onto a caliche track that was almost a road, the truck bumping hard enough for the glove box to pop. Mason said to look for the fence. I saw it first. A sag in the barbed wire, a gate that wasn't a gate, and behind it a small knoll like a sleeping animal. The lantern was there, about shoulder high, planted in a wrought iron stake that looked like a shepherd's crook hammered straight. The glass was wavy and bubbled. The flame inside moved the way a breath does when you're trying not to wake someone. We parked and walked up. My hands knew it was cold, but my face felt warm by the time we reached the knoll. The flame wasn't bright like a camp lantern. It was steady and low, a candle that hadn't learned the word gutter. The grave beside it was no more than a shape, a shallow mound that could have been an accident of dirt. No headstone, no name. The fence had a loop of rusted chain with a snapped lock. I stepped over. Mason followed, but he kept a respectful distance from the mound. "It's not a trick," he said. I thought maybe one of the ranchers was messing with everybody, like a feed line buried to it. No line. And I don't think anybody walks out here every night to fuel it. There'd be tracks. We'd brought a jug of water without talking about it. He set it down and did not reach for it. I found myself resisting the idea of touching anything. There was a feeling, not drastic, nothing cinematic. Just a presence, like a conversation about to start. 3 other vehicles came while we stood there. A couple in a dusty Camry parked and sat without getting out. A small convoy of teenagers pulled up and took turns daring each other to cross the fence. One of them tossed a rock toward the grave, and the others told him he was an idiot and hustled him back to the car. Finally, a white county truck rolled by and slowed, but didn't stop. Nobody honked or made a big deal. That was the oddest part. There was an unspoken rule at work. The rule was that you didn't talk over the flame. I don't know what I expected. Some rush of cold, a scent, a sense of being watched. What I got instead was stillness that gathered and gathered until I realized it had weight. The horizon made a shallow bowl. The flame didn't so much burn as exist. When the wind touched me, it felt like the aftermath of a thought. "We should take a picture," I said finally, because I felt like I had to say something obvious to break whatever was happening to my voice. "Just one," Mason nodded. He took out his phone and angled it, looking for a way to avoid a lens flare. He took 3 photos. In the first 2, the lantern was the same orange dot he'd shown me at Whataburger. In the third, the autocorrect went askew and the whole scene blued out like we were underwater. When he tilted the screen to escape the glare, the blue shifted and a shape showed itself. A darker blur beside the mound, kneeling, head bowed, mouth open as if he were either telling a secret or saying a name for the last time. Mason exhaled. I told myself it could be anything, just our shadow warped by the glass or a trick of long exposure, until I noticed that the mouth was too round for a whisper. It was the kind of open that happens when breath won't work and you're pushing words out on nothing but need. "Delete it," a voice said behind us. I turned. A man stood at the fence line. He was older, with a rancher's hat and a denim jacket polished by long wear. He had that straight posture you get from lifting more than you talk. I didn't hear his truck arrive, and I hadn't heard the crunch of gravel under his boots. He didn't look angry. He looked tired. "It gets to sticking," he said. "You show it around and you think about it when you're supposed to be thinking of real things. You drive out here on nights when there's no reason. Then you start seeing stuff in other lights. Tail lights, porch lights, the green on your microwave. It all means more than it ought to." "Delete it," Mason did, thumb trembling. The man nodded once. He stepped over the fence like he had done it 1,000 times. He walked to the lantern and adjusted nothing that I could see. He stood there a long moment, eyes down, then he stepped back and looked at us. "You want the story?" he asked. "I do," I said. He glanced at Mason's phone as if to decide whether we had earned it. Then he told us that his name was Nick, and that his grandfather had run cattle on this land. In 1932, the winter was raw and cracked with wind. A drifter came through asking for work. He had a lantern, and the lantern looked much like the one before us. Bubbled glass, wrought iron, black as a burnt nail. The drifter worked for a few days, a quiet man who sang when he thought nobody was near. Then he took his lantern and went, walking one evening toward town, chasing the glow of windows. A north wind pushed the temperature down like a trap door. They found him the next day curled near this rise. He had no papers. No one claimed him. They buried him where he lay. The lantern they staked as a mark until they could figure out what to do about a proper headstone. The flame burned that night and every night after, and in the morning when Nick's grandfather tried to pull the lantern up, the stake didn't budge. Men came with tools. They jarred their shoulders and swore. The iron held. Someone said to let it be. The county forgot it, except when people remembered. Folks have tried to pour water on it, Nick said. They've tried to box it, tried to dig around it. It's not a trick this ground plays. It's a trick we play on ourselves. What we think we can carry off. What we think we can take with us. You keep trying to take a picture, that's when it starts talking. What does it say? Mason asked, very quietly. Depends on who's listening, Nick said. To me it says a name I have no right to. To my sister it sounded like our mother asking her to come in from the cold. To a boy from bushland it just screamed like a train, and he couldn't hear right for 2 weeks. If you leave it alone, it'll leave you alone. But if you try to shut it up or pull it out or pin it to a picture, it thinks you're asking for attention. We stood there and the flame made a tiny cooing sound inside the glass like breath tapping the lip of a bottle. The wind came with a little more edge and pushed at my jacket. The flame didn't lean. We thanked Nick. He nodded and went back to the fence. He got into a truck I swear I hadn't seen arrive and drove off slow without headlights until he reached the caliche, and then clicked them on. Mason exhaled like you do after holding a plank too long. We left without pouring the water. I slept on Mason's couch, but the sleep stayed shallow like water that refuses to cool. Every time I got close, my mind tipped me back to the image of the mouth open beside the mound. When light came, I felt hungover, though I'd had nothing to drink. We spent the next day doing small chores for his aunt and picking through thrift stores for shelves. Late in the afternoon, we got a text from a guy named Tyler that Mason sometimes worked nights with. He asked if we'd seen the lantern lately and told us he'd been out there the previous evening. The flame had been dimmer than usual. He was thinking of bringing a canning jar to try to catch the smoke, just to see what would happen. He added a laughing emoji. Then he sent another message that had no words, just a photo of the lantern, framed badly, flagging light, horizon tilted, and in the corner a bit of the grave. If you zoomed, or if you simply let your brain adjust, you could see 2 impressions in the dirt like knees. Mason didn't write back. He put his phone face down and rolled his shoulders the way you do when you want to shake a heaviness off and can't. That night he asked me if we could go again. I told him I had to head out in the morning. He said he knew, and that was fine, and he was just asking. He tried to make it casual again and failed. I told him I'd go one more time because I knew he'd go without me otherwise. We took heavier flashlights. The wind was up, a steady pressure. When we parked, there were no other cars, not even the Camry couple. The lantern looked the same as before, which I found weirdly disappointing until I realized what thought I had just had. If nothing had changed, that should have been a relief. Mason crossed the fence first. He set his flashlight on the ground so it didn't backlight the glass. He crouched by the mound and spoke a little. He said he hoped he wasn't bothering anyone. He said he was just here to look. He said he wouldn't take anything and he wouldn't try to move anything. The wind fussed his words away. The flame tightened like someone drawing breath between their teeth. I stayed back. I'm not brave. I'm a cautious person who makes fun of cautious people to keep from hating myself for it. I remembered Nick's warning. I remembered the blue photo. I told myself to let my cousin scratch the itch and be there to get him out when he accidentally drew blood. Mason took out his phone and didn't raise it. He turned it over in his palm like a coin he was thinking of spending. He said quietly that sometimes at night he heard something in his apartment sing in the air vent. He said that 2 nights ago he'd tapped the vent with a broom handle, and the tapping had come back in the same rhythm. He said he had started seeing the lantern light every time he shut off his kitchen and the dark reshaped itself. He said he didn't want to bring anything home that he couldn't set down. Then don't, I said. Just don't. He nodded without looking. He put the phone back in his pocket. The flame eased. I swear that's the word. It relaxed like a muscle unclenching. I loosened too. That was when a second light blinked beyond the fence. Just a weak pulse, then darkness. I thought Tyler had arrived, or maybe Nick, and I was relieved to imagine other people. The pulse came again, not where a truck would be, but lower, as if someone were walking with a small flashlight. It drifted left and right and then steadied. It was dimmer than the lantern and slightly green, like a traffic light far away in mist. Mason didn't notice at first. He was staring into the glass as if he could see the wick. The greenish light moved toward us without raising dust, without any footprint sound. I stepped toward the fence, suddenly angry without a reason, as if someone had approached our table too close at a bar. I said hello in a voice that tried to sound larger than my body. The green light stopped. Then it rose to about the height of a man's chest. "What do you see?" Mason asked, still not turning. "Someone else," I said. "Stay where you are." The green light dimmed and flared like breath through cupped hands. It made no halo on the ground. It didn't show the grass or the fence or the shape that held it. It was just suspended in the air. Then it shifted sideways like a head cocking, to listen, and the lantern flame answered with a tiny bloom, warmer, the color of an orange cut open. Mason stood up. The wind leaned harder, too constant to be a gust. The green light jerked twice and then began to recede, not turned away so much as drawn back, like a tide refusing the shore. It dwindled to a bead. Then it went out. The lantern's flame clicked inside the glass, soft as a fingernail. I heard faint and unmistakable the sound of a word pulled through cloth. It was Mason's name. He heard it too. I knew by the way he took a half step backward, like hearing your own name in a crowd from a person you didn't know. He said very quietly that we should go. I agreed. We backed toward the fence like people who have been told not to make sudden moves. The wind changed and it smelled like dust, and a sweet rot you sometimes get when a deer dies in a ditch and the sun works it, and the night cools it, and the scent rises in waves. Mason climbed the fence first and I handed him his flashlight. He took it wrong and it clattered. The noise crashed over the quiet and I flinched and waited for something to answer it. Nothing did. The flame remained the size it had been, a calm pupil. We got in the truck and shut the doors hard, and both of us laughed in a way that said we weren't laughing. We pulled onto the caliche and tracked back to the county road. When the highway showed itself like a black river, Mason's shoulders fell. "Don't tell anyone it said my name," he said. "I don't want to be the next guy in everybody's version." "I won't," I said, "and I haven't until now, because I'm telling this for a different reason. I'll get to that." The next morning I drove home. The sky stayed low and the radio crackled in and out. When I stopped for gas in Clarendon, my reflection in the gas station window looked dusted with flour. I put on sunglasses and felt better with a barrier between me and my own face. By the time I reached my apartment, my chest had unhitched. I went straight to the shower and stayed there long enough for the bathroom mirror to fog to milk. That night, making tea, I glanced up and saw a warm color on the horizon of my kitchen. Not a reflection, not my lamp. It was the glow off the tiny orange numerals on my stove clock. It had always been there, but I had never felt it before. My brain registered color and the place under my ribs went hollow like a step down I hadn't meant to take. When I moved, the glow shifted as if it noticed me. I shut the kitchen light back on and hated myself for it. 2 days later, Mason called me mid-afternoon. He sounded wired and brittle. "Tyler took a jar," he said without preamble. He tried to catch the smoke. It wasn't smoke. It's like he trapped heat and it didn't know where to go. The glass cracked. He says it was nothing, just temperature change. He says he dropped the jar and it broke and he kicked the pieces away from the mound so nobody would cut themselves, and that was it. He sent me a picture last night. He forwarded it before I could say no. It was another bad photo. Horizon slanted, light too bright and then too dark, and in the middle the lantern flame dimmed to a seed. Beside the mound was the shape, clearer this time. Kneeling again, not as if the person were praying, but as if he were pressing his ear to something in the dirt. The mouth was open. Mason zoomed for me and I didn't ask him to. When the pixel stabilized, I could see that the lips were pulled wider than an ordinary mouth, and that the space inside wasn't black. It was the color of iron before it turns red. "I told him to stay away for a while," Mason said. He said sure, but he went back. He sent me a voice note. He played it. There was wind and the soda can rattle of a pickup bed, and then a small dry sound like breath in a bottle again. And then a syllable that could have been many words if your mind pushed it. Home, hold, whole. After a pause, a second word, in. Then a third that could have been a name, my cousin's or anyone else's. The recording cut off in a hiss that wasn't static but sounded like air leaving a tight place. "He says he's fine," Mason said. "But he doesn't sound like he's fine. I told him to come over and he said he would, and then he didn't. That night I dreamed a prairie I've never walked. The light in the dream was the color of split oranges low, and the wind had a weight to it like an animal draped over your shoulders. I woke feeling like I'd been talked to for hours and couldn't remember a single sentence. The ceiling fan above me ticked like a knuckle on a jar. I called Mason early. He didn't pick up. He texted later to say he'd slept through his alarm and was heading to work and we'd talk after. We didn't. 2 days went by. I told myself not to be dramatic. I called again and he finally answered and sounded normal enough that I calmed down. He said he had stayed off the back roads and was keeping the lights on at home. He said he had put tape over the LED on his TV because it felt like an eye. He said if I drove up next month we could do Palo Duro like we meant to. That could have been the end. We could have been the adults who tell themselves a story got near them and then got bored. But the thing about the lantern, and this is why I'm writing this and why I'm not sharing pictures even if I had them, is that it doesn't need you to keep seeing it. It only needs you to keep noticing light. And lights are everywhere. A sliver under a door. A charger breathing on your nightstand. The tiny glow of a smoke detector that refuses to die. After you stand by that grave and listen, every small light becomes a suggestion. A week after I came home, I bought a new phone case because my old one had a crack and the crack annoyed me. The package came with a screen protector and a tiny LED pen light to help you see dust specks as you applied the film. That night I stuck the film and when I was done, the pen light rolled on my table and wouldn't settle. It wasn't on. I picked it up and it felt warm. I tapped the end. No click. I set it down and it rolled again and the table smelled briefly like rain on dry dirt. The scent you get before a storm when the ground exhales. I went to bed and left the light in a drawer. At 3 a.m, a noise woke me. A small sound like a fingernail tapping a glass from the inside. It came once and then again. I got up and stood in the kitchen and listened. The sound presented itself as humble and patient. It seemed to come from no one place. I told myself it was the refrigerator cycling, the building moving, the ordinary vocabulary of a home. I went back to bed and pressed the heel of my hand against my sternum and waited for my heart to shut up. The next day I called Mason and told him about the pen light because it felt better to make it silly. He laughed and said I was an easy scare. Then he said he had to go because someone had come in to return a part and he was the only one up front. He hung up mid-sentence and I heard him say, not to me, "Hey," like he'd stepped into a room he didn't realize was occupied. I haven't heard from him in 4 days. I texted his aunt and she said he was fine. Working nights, tired but fine. She sent a thumbs up emoji like a period to end the topic. I called Nick's number, which I shouldn't have had but did. Because Mason had saved it and once at his kitchen table, I had snapped a picture of a list of phone numbers he kept for handymen and ranchers and tow trucks. The number rang and then went to a voicemail that said the mailbox was full. I am sitting at my own kitchen table now. I have the pen light on the table and it is not on. The stove clock is glowing orange and I have told myself 10 times to unplug the stove just so I don't have to fight the impulse to watch that light breathe. Outside, somewhere far yet not far, a train is pushing air. I thought about driving back to Amarillo. Then I thought about what I'd do there. I don't want to take a picture. I don't want to bring water. I don't want to test the glass with a jar. I want to ask a question I can't name and I am afraid that whatever answer I get will be mine. And not transferable, unhelpful to anyone else. Like a private warning given too late. So I'm posting this here instead. If you are anywhere near Amarillo and someone says lantern grave, consider not going. If you go, consider not taking anything with you that catches light. Don't try to make proof for people who weren't there. It's not that they won't believe you. It's that belief is not what the place wants. It wants your attention. It wants you to hear your name in a voice that isn't yours and doesn't mind if you think it is. There's one more thing. When I was a kid and scared of thunderstorms, my mother used to put a jar on the porch and tell me it would catch the storm smell. And in the morning she'd put the jar under my nose and say, "There it is." I can smell that smell right now in a room with closed windows, dry as paper. The pen light is warm. The stove clock is steady. Somewhere out past the town limits, a flame burns inside bubbled glass and a man kneels and his mouth is open. And maybe he is whispering to the ground, or maybe he is just trying to draw breath for one more word. If I turn off the light, I will hear it. If I leave the light on, I will hear it. The whisper is coming either way. I am not taking a picture. I am not touching the drawer. I am going to sit here until it is morning, and I am going to pretend that daylight is a door that only opens one way. I'm not a superstitious person. I do environmental surveys for a living. Most of my days are mud, clipboards, and quiet hours with a GPS unit. I've logged marshland in Cameron Parish, pine stands near Natchitoches, and a lot of riverbank along the Red. Colfax, Louisiana, came up on my schedule last spring because the parish wanted a floodplain assessment around the old cemetery north of town. There's a low spot near the bend, and a few graves have been slumping in wet years. My boss said it would be easy. A day mapping subsidence, another day writing a report, then home. I drove in on a Wednesday evening. It was April, heavy air, low light under pecans. The cemetery sits up a little from the road behind a chain-link gate with a sign that reads St. Barnabas. Most of the markers are old, worn marble, some cast iron fences, a few stone lambs, and that tall iron cross you can see from the road if you know where to look. I'd heard of it before I came. If you work enough in Louisiana, someone eventually tells you the Colfax story. They lower their voice and say the Iron Cross moves. It shifts a little each year around the anniversary of the massacre by the river. When people say that word here, they don't say anything else for a second. They let it hang there and wait for you to nod. I always did. You can acknowledge history without getting pulled into campfire talk. That was my attitude. I checked into a motel on Main near the gas station and the laundromat. The guy at the desk had LSU baseball on a radio and barely looked up. When I told him I had business at St. Barnabas, he glanced at the keys on their hooks and slid the one farthest from the office across the counter. "You picked a heavy week," he said. "You need anything out there, ask for Eunice. She keeps the place." "Eunice?" "Eunice Robideau. Groundskeeper, 20 years. You'll see her. I slept fine. When I woke, the sky was gray and already sweating. I grabbed coffee and drove out with my gear. Eunice was at the gate when I pulled up, a small woman with a baseball cap and a straw broom. She had a face that didn't move much except the eyes. They flicked to the back of my truck and the long case that holds my survey tripod. "You the riverman?" she asked, something like that. "I'm mapping the low spots so the parish can plan drainage." "Uh-huh," she said. "You got your chalk?" "I've got measuring tape, flags, a chalk line if I need to pop grades." She looked at me for a second. "You'll want chalk if you're staying past 5. I'll be done by 3. She opened the gate and stepped aside. "I'll be around," she said. St. Barnabas is quiet in the morning. Birds racket in the trees, but it's a soft kind of sound like it stays on the leaves. The red runs slow out past the oaks, brown as tea. I set up on the high corner and started walking transects, making notes where ground had sunk. It wasn't dramatic. A lot of old cemeteries dip and wave as soil shifts. I flagged a handful of plots and found 2 spots where winter water had pooled. Mid-morning, Eunice came by with a plastic cup and handed it to me. "Water," she said. "Thank you." I drank and asked about the Iron Cross because I knew I would, and better to get it out of the way. "What's the deal with that anyway?" "People talk. You seen it move?" She looked at the cross a long time before she answered. It's set over an iron fence around a single grave on the south end. The thing is taller than a man. The vertical piece is square stock anchored into a slab, and the cross arm is heavy. There are dozens of older markers around it, but they blur together. The cross stands out like a weather vane. "It shifts at night sometimes," she said. "Not every year and not always on the same day. But the week of it, that's when. You mark it with chalk at dusk, it'll be wrong at dawn. If you mark the base, the mark will be on the other side in the morning. Not scuffed, not dragged. The whole thing will be turned to hair like somebody down there has hold of it and pulls." "Down there," I said to make her words sound like a joke. She didn't smile. "You hear thumps under the slab when it's close to the day. I don't come here at night that week anymore." That would have been the end of it, except she asked me, "You want to look at something?" She took the broom handle and pointed to a faint white line on the east side of the cross's base. It was a chalk dash about the length of a thumb. "I marked that yesterday right where it met the slab," she said. She walked around to the west face of the same base. "It was here last year at this time. I draw the little dash in the same place. Now look, on the west face was faint chalk too, not a smear. Another small dash matching the first like a second ghost of the mark. It looked old, rubbed by rain and time. People say I moved it," she said. "I don't have that kind of back." I bent and put my hand to the metal. It was warm already. A quiet rattle ran up into my fingers from inside the iron, like when a truck passes a block away and the window glass hums. I told myself it was wind. There wasn't any. By noon, I'd finished my grid and eaten a sandwich sitting on the tailgate. A white pickup rolled up as I was wiping my hands, and a man got out in plain clothes with a badge clipped to his belt. He introduced himself as Deputy Carter. He had the slow patience of a man who'd grown up listening to old people tell stories on porches and didn't mind them. He said the parish office told him I'd be here and that he'd like to check in on out-of-towners who work near the cemetery this week. Folks like to come look and leave beer bottles, he said. You planning to stage any equipment overnight? Just the tripod and some flags in the truck. Why? He glanced toward the cross. If you hear anything funny, call the office. We pretend to ignore some things, but we still show up. We don't need you writing about us on the internet. I'm not a writer, I said. I build drain tables. He chuckled and left a card anyway. Before he left, he looked down and scuffed the dirt with his boot. The earth was scored there, like something had dragged its fingers. I would not have seen it if he hadn't pointed. I told my sister I'd stop doing this, he said, telling people to look. But if you're here tomorrow, you'll see it more. I should have gone back to the motel, typed my notes, and called it a day. The work was simple. I could have filed the report by Friday and been gone before the weekend barbecues. But the chalk mark sat in my head. When you spend your life measuring things, seeing a measurement ignore you is a burr under the skin. Around 3, I went to the hardware store near the courthouse and bought a box of contractor's chalk in blue and a cheap tape. On a walk back to the motel, I saw a church sign changing letters by hand. A young priest stood by an older man with his sleeves rolled, both of them talking and laughing. The priest saw me looking at my chalk and called across the sidewalk. We still use that for cathedrals. Do you work at St. Barnabas? I asked because that was the only church I had on my mind. St. Mary's, he said, and his smile thinned just a little. We all know St. Barnabas, though. Watch yourself there after dark. You believe the stories? I believe people keep telling them, he said. I went back to the cemetery near 5. The air was different. You can feel when a place expects night. It gets hushed without getting quiet. The cicadas throw a blanket of noise over everything, and the other sounds sit under it like some animal hiding below brush. The road carried a few cars home. Eunice had finished watering the azaleas and was closing her shed. You're coming back, she said. I want to do a little test, I said, just to shut up the itch in my head. Be done fast, she said. Moon won't be up till late. I colored a clean, thin dash on the east side of the crossbase, exactly where iron met concrete. I checked with the tape so I'd know if I'd misremembered. 5.5 inches from the corner to the center of my mark. Then I walked around to the west side and drew nothing. I didn't want to confuse myself with 2 marks. I checked the slab for cracks, for rust bleeding from bolts, for any sign of play. It was solid. I pressed harder until my shoulder hurt. It didn't give. You want to hear something worse than the moving? Eunice asked from a few feet away. Define worse, I said. She looked past me to the river. When it moves, sometimes something else gets a little closer. What else? She pointed to an unassuming plot about 20 yards away. It was a low rectangle of faded stones without a name. No marker, just a border. And inside the border, a flat piece of slate sunk a little on one end. The slate had a shallow cup in the center from 100 years of rain. There's a stain in the cup when it starts. It doesn't look like much from far away, but you get close and it looks like iron water, like the color you get if you soak nails. It wasn't there last week. It's there today. It will be darker tomorrow, and the day after that. What's under it? I asked. She shook her head. It doesn't want a name. I could lift the stone. That would be the worst thing you could do, she said, even if you didn't believe any of it. She left and locked the gate behind me. I could call if I needed to get out, she said, but she didn't want to wait around. It wasn't a threat. She just wanted to be somewhere else. I told myself I'd mark the base, sit in my truck for an hour and then go. If the chalk was different in the morning, I would tell myself I misremembered. If it wasn't different, I could stop thinking about it. Simple. The hour stretched. Bats replaced birds. The sky went dark blue over the pecans, then black. In my side mirror, I watched my own face go soft. Around 9, a silver sedan pulled up and parked down the road. A couple in their 20s took a picture at the gate and then left. It was the only proof I wasn't the last person awake in town. I got out once and walked to the cross. I put my fingertips on the iron again. It felt colder now, like metal under a house that never sees sun. The breeze, if you could call it that, came from the water. It brought damp and a smell like pennies left on your tongue. I thought it was because of what Eunice had said about the slate and iron water. Once you hear a word, you smell it everywhere. Back at the truck, I texted my sister. She likes junk like this and never misses a chance to tell me to stop doing the very thing I'm about to do. I told her where I was and what time I expected to leave. She sent a skull emoji and a prayer hands. Practical. Close to 10, the thumps started. They weren't loud. If a branch had fallen on the far side of the cemetery road, I would have called it that and gone home. This sounded like someone trying not to be heard. A dull, slow pressure. It came from the direction of the cross. It came from under it. 3 thumps. A pause, 2 more. Then nothing. I waited for a truck to pass so I could have an excuse to say the ground shook. There was no truck I could have driven away. I could have said, that's enough, I saw what I came to see, even though I hadn't seen anything yet. But that itch, again, it pushed me out of the truck and along the path to the cross. The gravel sounded huge. The air held my breath in front of my face and let me hear my own heartbeat in my ears like I was underwater. At the cross, I crouched and shined a small flashlight at the base. The chalk line was still where I drew it. Exactly, I measured. 5.5 inches from the corner. I took a picture with the phone because that's what you do now. I tilted the light at a shallow angle to catch any unevenness in the slab. The concrete looked like an old sidewalk. Fine sand exposed around the edges of stones. A hairline crack near the anchor bolts. I had seen 1,000 slabs like it. Then a thump came again. Not under my feet. Under the iron. The sound had a heavy shape to it, like something with the mass of a person pressing up. Testing, not from far below, but close. I flashed the light up along the shaft of the cross. Nothing. I held my breath so I could hear in the brief quiet between my own heart and the highway a 1/4 mile away. In that trough of sound, I heard something like a long exhale. That's the only way to describe it. The noise you hear when a man lets go of air through his nose after he's set down something heavy. My flashlight died. It didn't fade. It just went black. Cheap batteries, I told myself. And I reached up without thinking to brace myself on the metal and stand. The iron was colder than the air by a lot. It felt like touching a rail in January. Under my hand, I felt a tremor. The kind of vibration you get if you put a hand on the hood of a truck with the engine idling. Then the cross moved. It didn't jerk. It didn't sway. It rotated maybe the width of a thumbnail. East. The chalk line in the corner of my eye hopped and slid a tiny fraction to match, like the paint line on a compass needle waking up. It would have been easy to pretend I imagined it, except my hand was on the metal, and I felt the motion in my bones. As the cross stopped moving, there was a sound inside the iron like a long, faint groan. Not a ghost moan. The noise a beam makes when weight shifts. I backed away fast and ran into someone behind me. I turned expecting nobody and found the priest from the church sign breathing hard, a small blue cooler in his hand. He held it like a toolbox. I didn't see a car. He said, "Don't run," as if that would help, and I didn't. I stood there like a kid caught with cigarettes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Checking on it," he said. "I told myself last year I wouldn't. I told my superior I wouldn't. But I don't sleep if I don't come by." "Did you see it move?" He nodded and swallowed. His face had a sheen. "I measured it with chalk once," he said. "I still have the piece in my desk. It's got dust in it from the night, like it took some of the slab with it when it moved." He set the cooler down and opened it. Inside, on ice, were 3 plastic bottles of water and a small mason jar sealed with tape. The jar was full of something the color of tea with a little rust. He took it out with both hands like he was afraid of spilling it. "This was in the cup on the slate," he said. "I collect a little every year, thinking someone will be able to tell me it's iron from the soil or tannins from leaves. The lab always says it's iron, yes, and they shrug. But I bring it anyway. I don't know why." We both turned when gravel hissed at the gate. Deputy Carter's white pickup rolled in, and Eunice's car behind it. She must have seen my headlight beam earlier and called him. They got out without speaking and came to where we stood. The deputy put a hand on my shoulder like he needed to make sure I was real. Eunice looked at the base and then at the priest's jar. She looked tired. "Don't pour that," she said to the priest. "I won't," he said. I told myself that too. A thump came, a bigger one, and we all stepped back. The earth near the iron fence line shivered. I saw in the corner of the slab a hair of soil bulge, settle, and bulge again. It was not like a gopher hole. It was not an animal. It was a hand. That's what my brain said in a voice as flat as a caption. There is a hand down there pressing up. The press didn't break the concrete. It only made the slab talk in tiny cracks. The cross moved a hair again east. The chalk line slid. Okay, the deputy said. Okay, he wasn't okay. None of us were. We stood there because leaving would have meant turning our backs and hearing the noise with no sight to go with it. He lifted his phone. I thought he was going to call for help, but he only shined the screen like a weak light toward the other plot, the slate. Look, he said. It's darker. He was right. Even in weak light, the cup looked full to the lip with that brownish water. My mouth was dry. The priest took half a step toward it and stopped when Eunice touched his sleeve. Don't, she said. It wants eyes on it. Don't give it yours. Is this every year? I asked because asking small questions kept me from running. Some years are louder, she said. Some are quiet and you feel silly for staying awake. This year isn't quiet. You came on a heavy one. Why does it move east? I asked. Why always east? No one answered. The river is east. The courthouse is east. The place where the story happened is east. The cross knows the way and doesn't care that time has turned the town. That's the sentence that came to my mind and made me mad, because it was the kind of sentence people write online when they're trying to make a point. I didn't want to be the kind of person who tells you a cross knows the way. But the cross turned a breath more while I stood there telling myself I was rational. My phone buzzed. It was my sister. She said, "You leaving?" I typed, "Soon," because I wanted that to be true. We all took a few steps back and stood in a crooked line, 4 human beings who would look dumb if someone drove by and saw us staring at iron. The priest held the mason jar against his chest like a baby. The deputy flexed his jaw. Eunice put her hand on the fence in front of the nameless plot and pressed as if to hold it in place. She kept her eyes down on her own shoes. It changed around 11. The noise stopped. Not because it was over, because it was listening. The whole place tipped onto its ear. The highway went quiet. The bats went away. Even the river laid down its small slap of water on mud. The silence had a pressure in it like the air before a storm, except no storm ever felt that personal. The hairs on my arm lifted. I didn't believe in any of it, not really, but my body did. It believed in the old part of the world where something under your feet pays attention to you, if you pay attention to it. I made the mistake then. I said, "What do you want?" Out loud. The priest closed his eyes like I'd just said a name I shouldn't say. Eunice let go of the fence. The deputy didn't move. He only breathed in slow. There wasn't an answer. I didn't hear a voice. What I did feel was a slow pull, not toward the cross, but toward the other plot. The nameless one. It's hard to explain. The pull wasn't physical like a tug on a sleeve. It was like when you lose your balance because a crowd shifts, or like when a tide runs under you and your feet read it before your eyes do. The pull was east too, but not the same east the cross faced. It was east and down. The slate's cup overflowed. The brown water ran over the edge and left a thin stain on the stone. It reached the ground and darkened the dirt. A smell came up that was nothing like a pond or a rusted pipe. It was like an attic opened in July. Old cloth and iron and someone's breath who hasn't left a room in a long time. The deputy murmured, "Okay," again, and this time he took out his phone and tried to call. There was no service. The cross turned hard then. Not inches, not dramatic, but enough that my mark jumped clearly. It wasn't my imagination anymore because all of us watched the same motion. The base shuddered against the slab, and the chalk line landed exactly where last year's faint dash was. Like a hand making a notch on a wall and matching it to the one above. The thump under the slab came with it, and I felt that thump in my knees. When it stopped, I noticed something I hadn't before. On the far side of the base, opposite the fresh chalk, were gouges. Not scratches, not weather wear. Deep vertical scrapes the width of fingers, 5 of them. They were fresher than the cross. The metal was bright on the edges where rust flaked back. I don't know how I hadn't seen them in daylight. Maybe I didn't want to. "See?" Eunice said softly, like something underneath had hold of it and pulled. The priest lifted the jar. For a second, I thought he was going to pour it on the slab. A trade, a libation. He changed his mind and set it on the ground at the foot of the cross. He stepped back like he'd laid down an offering and didn't want to be too close to it. The jar looked small. The water inside rocked in a small wave and then calmed. A breeze came finally from the west. It brought the smell of cut grass from some yard on a street I couldn't see. It brought 2 voices laughing from far off, someone leaving a porch. The world resumed at its edges. The pressure lifted a little. The bats came back. The deputy's phone chirped with a notification. We stood there like people who'd just driven past a wreck and weren't sure if they should stop. "I'm going home," Eunice said. "I'll be here at 6. "I'll come at 6:30, the deputy said. The priest picked up his empty cooler and left the jar where he'd set it. He made the sign of the cross without thinking and caught himself and dropped his hand. He left without looking back. I stayed, not long. Just long enough to take one last picture of the base. The fresh chalk line on the east matched the old ghost of chalk on the west. The gouges stared like open mouths. I took a picture of the slate too, the cup with its iron water. My phone camera flattened it. It looked like any stain. I hate how that happens. You see something with heat in it and it turns cold when you try to show it to someone else. It makes you sound like you're making it up. When I drove back to the motel, the town was asleep. A cat crossed the street. A porch light burned over an empty chair. My key stuck in the door. Inside, the air conditioner rattled and the room smelled like someone else's cigarettes. I sat on the bed and looked at my hands. They had rust on them from the cross. Except rust doesn't smell like that. It doesn't smell like a room that hasn't been opened. I scrubbed my hands with the motel soap until my knuckles were red, and the smell got lighter but didn't leave. I thought I would dream, but I didn't. I woke before my alarm with a dry mouth and a knot in my neck. In the early gray, I drove back to St. Barnabas. Eunice's car wasn't there yet. The gate was locked, but the chain was loose. I pushed in. The chalk mark had moved. It sat on the east face of the base exactly where my measure from the corner said it shouldn't be, if nothing had changed. I measured and wrote the numbers down as if numbers could make any of it feel like work. The gouges were deeper. That might have been in my head, but I don't think so. A bright new curl of iron flake lay on the slab under them like a shaved fingernail. At the slate, the cup was dry. Not a stain, not a wet ring. Dry like a tongue had licked it clean. I looked for the mason jar the priest left. It was still at the foot of the cross. It was empty, turned upside down. Not knocked over. Placed that way carefully. The lid still taped. I turned around then because the feeling came back, the pull. It wasn't as strong in daylight, but it was there like someone remembering your name from across a room. I looked through the fence toward the river. The water moved brown and patient toward the bend that swallows sound. I thought of all the people who were gone on that piece of river, no matter what words we use for it now. The cross faced east like it was listening. The ground on the opposite side of the base, the side where the gouges were deepest, looked disturbed. Not dug, not fresh dirt, just slightly higher than yesterday, like a palm under a blanket raising it half an inch. I finished my work. I mapped the low spots and suggested in my report that the parish install a French drain along the south edge, away from the slab. It was sound advice with numbers behind it. I didn't write any of this down. I'm writing it now because every April, the week rolls around and the smell comes back in my head. It finds me even if I'm 3 parishes away. I smell iron in a long-closed room in the river. I think of that jar upside down and the clean cup on the slate. I think of the way the cross moved like a compass needle waking up. I check the calendar without meaning to. I find myself looking east from wherever I am and listening a second longer than I should to things that don't have anything to say. 2 weeks after I left Colfax, I got a small package in the mail with no return address. Inside was a piece of blue chalk wrapped in a paper towel. It was the chalk I'd used. I knew it by the cut where I'd pried it out of the box with a key. The towel smelled like an attic. My name on the envelope was in a woman's hand. I showed it to my sister. She gave me that look she gives me when I bring her something she doesn't want to believe. "Throw it away," she said. I didn't throw it away. I put it in a drawer. When I took it out last week because the season was back upon me, it left a faint blue dash on the wood and on my thumb. I wiped it off. The dash appeared by itself on the other side of the drawer an hour later. It's not big. It's not dramatic. It's just a little mark where wood meets wood. A little east if you line up the room the way a person stands inside it. It's nothing right up until you listen. Then it's a hand under a slab testing weight. It's a river that doesn't forget what it carried. I don't know what moves the cross. I don't know why the jar was empty or why the cup was dry. I don't know what would happen if someone pulled up the slate. I think some things want to stay halfway. Not to be solved, but to be noticed again and again so they don't settle into the bottom of the river and disappear. If you go to St. Barnabas in April, take water for yourself and chalk if you must. Don't go alone. If you feel that pull, don't follow it past the fence. Don't say out loud what you think it wants. And if you wake up in some other town with the smell of iron on your hands and no reason for it, don't scrub so hard. The smell will fade on its own. It will come back when it needs to. Keep your eyes on the corner of the room where wood meets wood. If a little mark appears there where none was before, you'll know which way the cross is facing. You'll know it's listening. You'll know something under the old things is still pulling.